Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Mad Mamluks. My name is Sim. Along with me is my co-host, Sheikh Amir.
Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Mort is still on vacation. We hope he's having a good time. I could picture him like in a little, those little balloon boats. You just sit in the pool.
Yeah, I don't even know where he is.
Glasses.
He's our best friend. We don't even know where he went.
He didn't even tell us, right?
Just disappeared, bro.
That's one thing about Mort. You guys think that
You think we're joking?
he doesn't tell us anything. He just
We depend on other people citing him in other countries or other states. That's how it works with Mort.
Folks, we have a wonderful show for you guys this afternoon. Help us out on patreon.com/the Mad Mamluks. This entire show is entirely supported by you guys. We don't make any money off the show. It's a community effort, and you guys are the ones responsible for any success related to the show. And make sure you throw a comment in the comment section below with your thoughts related to the show. And always, as always, click the old like button. Our guest today is a trauma and self-improvement therapist. Her name is Hana Alasry.
Hana Alasry.
Alasry.
It's all right.
Got it wrong.
It's all right. R, D almost sound the same.
What ethnicity is this?
What is it?
What ethnicity?
Ethnicity, I'm Yemeni.
Oh, Yemeni.
Mm-hmm.
1 second here. Hana, your camera went out. Of course. Difficulties.
It's all good. It happens once in a while.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Let's see if I can get you on another camera. We were having some problems with that camera before the show started.
There we go. You need to focus a little. All right.
Ooh, it's super close.
Yeah, no, that's just the focus thing. You're not gonna do that.
There you go.
Thank you, Maestro, sir.
Right. Okay.
All right.
What's that for a curveball?
Happens, man. Qaddarallah ma shaa fa'al. It's all right. But anyway, so we
Yeah.
were saying ethnically, our sisters from Yemen.
We love the people of Yemen.
Yeah.
Mort is part
Mort
Yemeni.
is part Yemeni also.
Yes,
sir.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So
what part of Yemen?
So we're from villages right by the city Ib. Right around
Iblid?
the city Ib.
Oh, Ib.
Mm-hmm.
that's in Iraq.
Yeah. I thought Iblid is in Syria.
Oh, okay. No, yeah.
Sorry, Sheikh.
No, it's okay.
Ib is a very funny name. It's just IB.
I'm in Arabic, Alif Ba.
Oh.
IBB in English.
Just sounds really cute, yeah.
Don't say funny, bro. This is our guest's first time here.
I know, but
Within 5 minutes,
No,
bro.
but I warned her before the show.
Okay, good. As long as
You did.
So she knows.
As long
She
as you got the
knows that
warning.
we're a bit
Okay.
goofy.
Okay,
So,
good.
Hana, what got you into this field? What is God conscious self-improvement therapy that you coined?
So just to make a quick correction. So by career, I'm a physician associate. So I actually practice medicine.
Okay.
And I am a trauma and self-improvement coach rather than therapist, because therapist is a legal designation.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
No problem. I actually recently pivoted to biohacking coaching instead of just self-improvement coaching. It's a niche within the niche of self-improvement. So really what got me into trauma coaching and self-improvement as a whole was, honestly, it was for selfish reasons. I was struggling immensely with my mental health for years, 2 decades, and I'm very transparent about this on my TikTok and YouTube channel. But I was dealing with 2 decades of chronic depression and anxiety. And I'm someone who's fairly high achieving. I practice medicine, I was getting community awards, but it honestly was a constant weight on my shoulders. It was insane. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, I don't know how I managed to survive. Within the last few years, I ended up developing significant health conditions. So it was like my health just ran into a wall. I developed a migraine disorder. I don't know if you guys get migraines or if people who are watching the audience understand what a migraine is. It's not just a headache. It is a horrendous headache associated with you have pain when you hear people's voices, the lights bother you, you get nauseous. I was literally dry heaving. Like I would, certain triggers, one of the triggers was hand sanitizer that had alcohol in it. Actual drinking alcohol. If you remember with the whole pandemic, the alcohol companies started making hand sanitizer. Major trigger. I remember literally driving home from one of my rotations, dry heaving the entire way, like wanting to get in bed. I was dealing with chronic fatigue, horrible insomnia, like waking up 14 to 20 times a night. And that's dangerous when you're someone who's trying to practice medicine. Yeah. At one point, I actually was in the emergency room because I developed pleuritis, which is inflammation of the lung, and my lung collapsed. So it was just, it was just to that point where I was realizing something is going on. This isn't normal. I need to figure it out. So I did. I am a research junkie. I dived in what is going on. SubhanAllah, I ended up with a therapist. I decided I'm going to go to therapy. Let's see if I can figure what's going on out. And this therapist, by the grace of God, was a trauma-informed therapist. And this isn't a common thing. So people don't really understand like what trauma is. And I'm sure we'll talk about it. But she did. And she was the one who kind of brought to light, what you're dealing with isn't just regular depression and anxiety. Your depression and anxiety are symptoms of this greater issue. And if we don't deal with the trauma and we don't deal with your dysregulated nervous system, you're going to crash and burn.
So when you talk about trauma, what does that actually mean? Is that a trauma from an injury? Because I remember when Mort actually said, like, I don't get trauma. I don't deal with trauma. Like, what is this trauma that everyone's complaining about? Yeah. And maybe I remember when I was at that point where I didn't understand, like, what are they talking about when they're talking about trauma? So maybe you can explain that. Yeah.
So trauma is both an actual physical experience and then an internal experience. So we can refer to trauma as an event, this thing that happened that is so overwhelming to you that it just completely knocks you off your rocker. Getting mugged, watching someone you love suffer, or you getting into a major car accident.
Looking at something very disturbing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what we call big T trauma. Like the things, if I told you I went through this, you're going to be like, whoa, that's crazy. Then there's little T trauma. And I think this is the one that a lot of people get confused about, which is the way we talk about it, right? Trauma can be too much, too fast, so that's a big T, or too little for too long. Little T trauma, and it's not to degrade it or make it seem like it's little, it's still very much trauma, is the constant issues that are sending your nervous system into a dysregulated state. And very often what I tend to deal with is people who are dealing with severe neglect. So neglect from parents, neglect from partners. So that's the outward experience, the actual thing that you can describe to people. This is what happened. Internally, right, nervous system. So we get into the science of it. Everyone has a nervous system. It is comprised of your brain, your spinal cord, all the nerves that come out of it. Its job is, it has a lot of jobs, but one of its main jobs is to interact with the environment, take these sensory stimuli, what we see, what we hear, blah, 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 make meaning of it, and then adjust our behavior and based on certain patterns. So our brain loves patterns. Trauma, when you experience it in whatever realm, your body, your nervous system has become so overwhelmed by what just happened that it doesn't even have time to process it and turn it into patterns. It sends you into fight or flight, and with it being long enough, if you don't have time to process it, you remain in fight or flight. And so this looks like when someone, if you bring up a traumatic experience to someone who's traumatized, their body will react like they're almost still there. Their heart will start racing, their hands will get sweaty, you can see their eyes will start dilating.
So when you say they remain in flight or fight, they don't know that they're in a flight or fight mode. They're just carrying on with life with that kind of in the back burner or kind of just embedded within them, and they don't realize that that's their type of thing. Is that what you're saying?
A lot of people don't know. Yeah. And it's the brain trying to protect itself, because it's like this thing that we went through is damaging to us. It's dangerous to us, right? It goes back to the primitive aspects of our brain. Your body's like, let me go into override your ability to think, and let me just handle this, and we're going to handle it by doing whatever we need to protect you, even if the threat is actually not there. Okay. Right? So I'll give you a very basic example. A kid who's been beaten by their father as a kid, right? As an adult, their father could have passed away. The father's no longer. Someone raises their hand and they flinch.
Yeah.
Okay, that reflex is a trauma response.
We see that with people who have PTSD. When they hear really loud sounds, some of them may fall to the ground and take cover, right? So if I can just backtrack a little bit. So what were you practicing in medicine?
So I do primary care, urgent care.
Primary care, urgent care. So you started practicing and you started having these episodes, or was it before you were practicing, after you finished and you were already practicing, you started having some episodes?
So I actually established my company while still studying medicine, while still in PA school. And all of these issues that I had were while in PA school and prior.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So because of the experiences that you went through, trauma-related or trauma-like symptoms that you had, you developed a method or felt the need to develop a method, because you mentioned biohacking. I have a lot of questions about biohacking. But is that how all this started? Because you went through it and you came out of it, or you knew how to come out of it, or you saw the tunnel, it was almost towards the end where you knew how to help yourself and you wanted to do something like that also?
So the cool thing about studying medicine is you kind of get you get access to research in a way that a lot of people don't get.
Of course.
And you are able to understand it. So yeah, I literally, I went to the therapist. She first introduced me to trauma. I read all the books. I looked up the studies. I was like, who are the thought leaders on trauma, right? And you mentioned PTSD. This is something a lot of people don't know. So when it comes to the medical field in general, what we practice in medicine is 10 years late. Like, research lags 10 years behind what you actually hear.
Yes.
So a lot of people are familiar with PTSD, and who do you automatically think of? Veterans, right?
Parents. Parents do that.
Yeah.
Parents have caused so much PTSD, they don't know.
Oh, I thought you meant parents go through PTSD because they're kids.
No, I mean, yeah, that too.
Depends how you look at it, I guess.
If it's
Depends how your kids are.
my kids, then I experience PTSD.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. But anyways, yeah.
But
So what's the misconception about PTSD?
You're ahead of the curve. The misconception is that PTSD only happens to veterans, or only happens because of very crazy instances, being mugged, like watching someone be murdered. There's now a new type of PTSD called complex. It's not new. We just have a name for it now. Complex PTSD, which is looking at these traumatic responses and traumatic disorder that's developed as a result of other traumatic circumstances. Think children of alcoholics or children of abusive parents, whether it's physical or emotional abuse, right? Think people who are dealing with severe neglect over long periods of time. That's complex PTSD.
Okay.
People don't know it exists. If you don't know it exists, you're not going to ever recognize that, whether you have it or not, because you don't even know it's a thing, and then you don't know how to actually get help for it.
Okay, I have a quick question. Now, when you said we associate PTSD usually with something that's very traumatic outwardly, let's say explosions, lots of killing in front of you, and then you come back home where you're no longer in that zone. You come back to a peaceful place, something doesn't feel right, but you also mentioned something very important, which is when children are neglected repetitively or throughout their childhood. How does that lead to PTSD, and what would be the trigger? And I'll give you a small example. Yeah. Some people may say that I'm very attached to this person because I'm very needy, because I was neglected. They come to a conclusion, maybe they get therapy, and they said, my therapist said that I trust people too easily, or I love people, fall in love with people too easily, and I cling on to them because, for instance, I had nobody cling on to me when I needed to be clinged on to. That's a thing, right? So how would somebody like that, how would PTSD emerge, or signs that would be shown in somebody who was neglected as a child in their formative years? What are some things to look for? What are some of those triggers?
Yeah. So going back to the idea of our nervous system, right? Our nervous system's job, the first thing our nervous system is always going to do is try to protect us, right? This is how Los Pantada created us. It's why as soon as you see something coming at you and you don't know what it is, you run. You feel the impulse to run without recognizing what it is. And then you realize it was just, it was like a cat. And then you're like, oh, it's fine. Yeah. Our nervous system is trying to protect us when a child, or an adult actually, but we often see it in childhood because you mentioned formative years, is noting that their caregivers, primary caregivers, are not meeting their needs. It's going to start stimulating a fight or flight response, because that kid, even though they can't think as deep as adults do, realizes I can't survive without my parents. I can't eat. I don't have a job. I can't eat. I can't take care of myself when I'm sick without my parents. And so their bodies, basically every time there's an interaction with parents that resembles something of that is a lack of safety, the brain shifts from the executive functioning side, which is our prefrontal cortex, into a side called the limbic system, which is the emotional side. And it starts to operate on reflexes. And so you can see this in various ways based on what the main trauma responses are. So we see fight, right? These are people that are like, you need to do this for me. And like, it can seem very chaotic. There's flight. There's also freeze and fawn, which are two other ones we can talk about later if you guys are interested in. As an adult, what you're actually talking about, are you guys familiar with attachment theory?
Yeah, when you get too attached to people and they won't let go.
No.
Or you can't let go.
Is that a guess?
You said it so confidently too. Though you're like, yeah.
Maybe we should diagnose him for that too. But anyways, go ahead. Yeah. So what's attachment theory?
So attachment theory is a theory. It's one of the most well-known and well-researched theories in psychology that talks about the way human beings form relationship with other people. And the primary thing that determines what kind of attachment style you have was your upbringing with your caregivers, right?
Okay.
You're talking about anxious attachment. Anxious attached people are the people that, like, when they are in a relationship with anyone, and it can be a romantic one, or you're getting to know someone for marriage, or it can be even just friendships.
Got it.
Any sign that they feel the person is pulling away, they lose it. Like they go into fight or flight like crazy. These are the people, like, there's a fight coming on and all of a sudden they're fighting and screaming and why are you doing, you don't love me, and it can be very chaotic and completely dismantle a relationship. So
okay.
That's it. I hope that
makes more sense.
question.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
How
that
it
makes a lot more
manifests.
sense. I still have a lot of questions, but
No,
I don't know,
no,
because
keep
you look
going.
like you wanted to ask.
No, go
okay.
ahead.
So if somebody says, like, for instance, right, a lot of times people who are active in the community, I just know about brothers. I don't know that many sisters. So I'm going to say about brothers, for instance, the general thing that you hear is obviously these brothers are upright brothers. They love their families. They love their wives. They love their children. But they have a very busy schedule, right? And the spouse, in this case, for instance, the wife feels resentment for a lot of the activity that this person's a part of, even though everybody kind of understands that that's an expectation. Even like when someone's getting married or whatever the case is, and they know that there's going to be to the point where they start saying, you know, like, I hate your friends, or I hate whatever the case is, right? And is that just a natural tendency that the spouse wants to just feel loved by their spouse, or is it something else? Because if they did have lots of childhood trauma and stuff, you know, family, parents, whatever the case is. So what I'm asking is, the general thing that I always hear from brothers is that, you know, I just feel guilty because I feel like I'm not getting a chance to spend enough time with my family, and then I go home and my wife is, always telling me how much she resents this lifestyle of yours and this and that. So is that anything trauma related, or is that just a natural response that somebody has to feel close to their husband, for instance?
It depends. It depends on the person and their situation. I know that we don't like that answer, but it could just be in that situation that expectations weren't communicated well, or there haven't been really great conversations about how do we manage this and make sure we're still maintaining a relationship. Or
That makes
maybe it's
sense.
a wife who is dealing with kids and is exhausted, and then it's like, you know, there's a resentment of, okay, my husband gets to up and leave whenever he wants. Even it can be a more so an issue of communication issues in relationships. But if there is an anxious attachment already, that's going to be exacerbated times 100.
Got it. So this, you started your practice, you're in medical school,
PA school.
I'm sorry?
PA school.
PA school, sorry.
Yeah. The med
PA
students are going to get into your comments. Like,
Sorry.
they're not doctors.
PA school. And PA stands for physician assistant, right?
Physician associate. Now they changed the
Associate.
name,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, they changed it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, people were confused.
No, it's okay. So in this process now, you have some experiences. You start to learn about those experiences and how to deal with those experiences. You start getting therapy and all that kind of, and I appreciate that you're very open about this stuff. It's really cool because we obviously learn from these experiences. When people are closed about these things, we actually don't know how to actually learn about it if we don't know anybody personal or have a conversation with them, right? So I really appreciate that.
No problem.
So now comes the point where you have ideas and you want to actually be of some type of service, right? So where does that begin, and how does that begin, and where are we now with that?
Yeah. So in 2021, I established my coaching company. And I first start off just putting out information. Let me just put out content, right?
And the name of the coaching company?
Salem Life LLC is the coaching.
SALEM?
SALIM.
SALIM, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was 2021. I'm just putting out content, just getting a sense of, I really wanted to see, do people even recognize what's going on? Because now we're adding the complexities of Muslims and the fact that a lot of us come from ethnic backgrounds, generational trauma. Do people even know what's going on, right? And how many people are actually traumatized versus just dealing with regular depression and anxiety? So did that. It took me 2 years to feel confident to put out my program. And in that 2 years, I'm researching, I'm building the activities, I'm building the entire program. So my group coaching program is a 10-week program, 2 hours each, strictly focused on healing trauma, right? From an evidence-based standpoint and through an Islamic framework,
Wow.
which is very different, because I think a failure of our community is the fact that we have not been able to intersect what our deen has to offer about healing trauma and what the research says. And we're seeing it now. Now there's more conversations, but it's still on stage. Lectures are just happening. We're not offering services just yet. And that's crazy when you think about the fact that I had the opportunity to study the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ for 2 years. And the Prophet ﷺ was extremely he went through extremely traumatizing experiences. There's an index of the top stressful things a human being can experience. They use it in psychiatric research. Losing a home, losing a spouse, losing a parent, losing a child, being having to move, getting married. These rank on the index.
Yes.
The Prophet ﷺ lost his wife, his grandfather, his uncle, his children, was a refugee. He should be PTSD to the max, unable to function. I'm going to give you what is PTSD, actual PTSD, not complex PTSD. What does it look like? I had a patient who has PTSD. He was a veteran in, Afghanistan. And when I would see this patient, he would literally be sitting in the room and screaming at someone that was not there. And I'm a veteran. And it would be alarming. Like, people would get scared. Like, this guy is screaming, so what's going on? He's going to fight someone. It's like, no, he's having a flashback. And I would literally have to go in the room and calm him down and say, hey, you're fine, you're safe. His blood pressure was always sky high because he was in a chronic state of fight or flight, right? The Prophet should have been like that if he was in any normal situation.
Very interesting observation, yeah.
So let's transpose that or take that example of that one veteran. How do you, like, for example, as Muslims, let's just say he was Muslim, how would you build up different mechanisms inside his mind to cope with that kind of trauma so that there's some kind of resiliency, so that, because it seems like, you're absolutely right. The Prophet ﷺ should be the biggest trauma case, but he isn't, and there's a reason why, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows humanity a template through him to build that mental resiliency, so that we don't encounter, or we have a better ability to cope with traumatic life events. How does your coaching kind of build that up?
Yeah. So the
Great
research,
question.
the research on trauma and healing trauma specifically it's pretty new. I think within the past 2 decades, the major breakthroughs have been made, because they used to just try to treat it with medication. And this guy was on antipsychotics. They'd up his meds every time he'd become symptomatic. He was an alcoholic. Like, a really, really sad situation. What they have found when it comes to healing trauma in general is you have to reverse engineer the nervous system, right? So we talked about the whole idea of how trauma happens because of the nervous system being overstimulated, you're in constant fight or flight, blah, blah, blah. Reverse engineering means you need to use your nervous system to process the trauma. And this is through something called somatic sensory processing. So this is where a lot of people have no idea. They think, I want to heal my trauma, let me go talk to a therapist, talk therapy, right? If you just talk about your trauma, you actually can traumatize yourself further, because you're speaking about it and you are kicking your limbic system into high gear.
Revisiting.
And this is why a lot of people who are specifically struggling with trauma end up leaving therapy. I got into it with a therapist once about this, and I was like, listen, I'm speaking from personal experience, and I'm speaking on behalf of my clients, right? Speaking about it isn't enough. Somatic sensory processing there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but it's using intentional body movements. It's using intentional calming techniques, breath work,
Did you say breath work?
Breath work.
Yeah.
Like Wim Hof breathing type stuff.
Oh, like
Yeah.
breathing techniques.
Breathing techniques.
Did you study the Wim Hof method?
I'm familiar with that. I personally have not tried it.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But
Yeah.
you're on a roll. But go ahead.
Yeah. And specifically what we call bitemporal stimulation of the brain. So how do we activate one side at a time of your brain, right? To process whatever is being processed. So essentially, if I had to like demonstrate this, how do we bring the traumatic experience up slowly for the person and get them to activate the executive functioning part of their brain to calm down so we can take this traumatic event and, first of all, create an entire story, and then secondly, move it from short-term memory to long-term memory, right? Because remember when I said people are experiencing it as if it's happening now? It's because it's in short-term memory. Their brain never processed it into long-term memory to protect them, right?
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and to make it more interesting, you mentioned the Prophet ﷺ was a template for us in like the extent of trauma he experienced. What did the Prophet ﷺ do almost every single night?
Stand up,
Yeah.
Tahajjud.
Yeah.
Tahajjud is somatic sensory processing. Somebody needs to research it. It follows all of the methods of somatic sensory processing. There's intentional movement. There's a meditative aspect. The recitation, right? You're supposed to recite with a measured recitation of the Quran. He was able to release emotion. He would cry in his sujood. He allowed himself to be in that state. Aisha would wonder if he literally passed away in his sujood because of how long he would stay. And he did it every 24 hours. He processed his trauma with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is building resilience too. So then he can come out and he can be the leader he needs to be to the Sahaba, and he can deal with their everyday things, and he can, lead battles and do all of the executive responsibilities that he needed to.
Yeah, it's something really interesting. You mentioned Surah Al-Muzammil, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Prior to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if something's very weighty, something's very heavy on you, and Allah's already giving him the expectation, right? إِنَّا سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. We're going to put upon you a very heavy word. And the reason why tahajjud was prescribed to Rasulullah is fard for him, because the word is going to be so heavy that you have to stand up. And if you don't stand up, then this word is going to be too heavy for you. And it literally was heavy for him. Literally heavy, right? As far as like weighing something down, weighing the knees of a camel buckling when he's getting wahi, right? But this thing of tahajjud, I actually never thought, that's actually really, really interesting, because we always heard growing up in the seerah that Rasulullah's mother and father passed away, especially his father. He never met his father. His mother passed away. And I think in our recent podcast with Adil, we were talking about the different types, the highest level of stress that someone could have is, through a divorce or a spouse passing away, children passing away, like all the stuff that you mentioned. All of that happened to him. All his boys passed away in such a young age. His wife passed away, his uncle passed away, his grandfather passed away, his mother, everybody around him's dying, right? And we always heard that the tarbiyah of Rasulullah, he didn't have parents, Allah did his tarbiyah. But the tarbiyah is so beautiful because it's, I forgot what you called that, somatic what?
Somatic sensory processing.
Somatic sensory processing.
SSP.
Cool. So, but the tahajjud itself was not just a shifa for him, it was a preparation, and it was him adhering to the call of Allah telling him to stand up at night, which means he's actually obeying somebody, right? Standing up at night and then doing the tahajjud and healing himself and preparing himself for the next day. Like his day actually didn't start with fajr, it started with tahajjud, because tahajjud's in the AM, right? So as far as your profession or what your project is, you had mentioned that you're going to work on this individual. We're talking about the individual who may have been Afghani or Yemeni, he had PTSD. But what are you using to understand how productive this person is becoming based on the method that you have? Like, I just want to throw another thing in there. I know I said a lot, but are you kind of using like faith-based counseling, what people refer to as faith-based counseling, and a scientific approach, and like a hybrid of those? Like, how is that?
Yeah. It's an intersection of those. So the patient that I had, I wasn't treating him for his PTSD. He just happened to have PTSD, and he was being treated for something else. A patient like that needs to be managed by a psychiatrist.
Yes.
Because he's on meds. But the question that you're saying, how would we know that he's progressing?
Yes.
The symptoms go away. They'll tell, like, someone who's traumatized will tell you. I was able to actually wake up this morning and get to my day without having a freak out. My flashbacks are less. I was able to, I know it seems silly, but I was able to stand up for myself without having a panic attack, right? I was able to sleep better last night. They will actually see the manifestation of their nervous system regulating after all of that in their life. My relationships are getting better. I'm not getting as overwhelmed when something happens. Now I can recognize what triggers me instead of just being in it when it happens and not knowing what that happened.
And does this also happen with them when let's just say they don't get any counseling, they don't get any therapy, they just take the medical route. Let's say they have a psychiatrist that sees, okay, you have this, I'm going to give you this medicine. Let's say they have that type of relationship with their psychiatrist, that's the only psychiatrist they have. Do they see these results the same way? Like, they don't, right?
No, this is the one of the biggest failures of psychiatry, and why there's been so much research on this in the past 2 decades is it wasn't working. Your symptoms can be managed for a short period of time, but our body, our physiology works on feedback loops. So if I'm giving an outside chemical, which is what medications are, your body is going to say, okay, hey, we're getting something from outside. We need to lower our natural production of
exogenous, the concept of
exactly exogenous and endogenous. So eventually, you just have to keep maxing out the dose of the medications, and then this person is still left with the nervous system dysregulation, right?
And God forbid they stop cold turkey.
And God forbid, and some of them do, and some of them do.
Yeah.
Not realizing that, then that's a psychotic episode that ends up in a hospital, or someone gets shot or killed or kills themselves. Unfortunately, it can be disastrous.
I know. I met somebody like that. They were heavy on certain medications. They stopped cold turkey. They literally called me and said, I want to kill myself. I said, wait, I'll be at your house in 15 minutes.
Never, for anyone watching this who's on any medications, never go off your medications without the guidance of a medical professional. We can wean, if you really want, we can wean you off and see how you do, but do not stop. Our bodies are very complex.
Very, very awesome advice. Thank you. So where do you fit into the puzzle now? Like, what type of people is it that you see regularly, and like, what type of results have you seen?
Yeah.
And what do you use with them? Sorry.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I have a program, 10-week program, 2 hours at a time. I work with Muslim women who are struggling with trauma in their lives from complex PTSD. In terms of the results that I've seen, I mean, I hear it from my patients, right? I am having less anxiety overall, because anxiety is a very common symptom of trauma. My relationships are better. Right, especially if they're still interacting with the person who traumatized them. You made the joke about parents, but it's very real. Yeah, that's actually one of the chief complaints that people come to me wanting to work with me about. This thing is ruining my life. How do I cope when I feel like the parents that I'm supposed to love and respect have destroyed my life?
Is this like childhood experiences from parents, smacking them around a little bit, or?
Well, child to adulthood.
What do you?
No, you smirked. I don't know. You looked at me and smirked.
Sometimes, look, we laugh about it because, at least in the way that at least guys, the way they talk about it, it's like, it made us strong, and it like the beatings that we got when we were kids. Yeah. And so when you talk about it to a therapist, you're almost like, wait, I can't take this seriously because this is like how, like, this made me strong, and this is what's missing from some of the discipline that's happening or is missing from parenting today, where, now my parents are telling me, like, don't make sure you better not hit him or you better not spank him. I'm like,
Grandparents.
wait a
That's
second,
a
you guys
grandparent
spanked
love.
the heck out of us.
No, that's a grandparent love. No, but I think you brought up something very interesting. So I think maybe what she's referring to, I'm going to guess, I don't want to speak for you, is like constant physical abuse and deriding the child in, again, those formative years. But look, I think there's a difference of like hitting and beating, right? Yeah. If a parent once in a while,
get me in trouble.
no, this is actually going to help all of us, inshallah, because you were laughing about it. So, look, this is actually obviously it can be a very serious matter, but it's a generational thing too, right? The way we grew up. But we actually have a policy. You can tell me what you think about this. I still feel very strongly. I think that if you're going to any of your children, number one, you shouldn't hit them in the face. Or the head. That's obviously not allowed Islamically. Even they're your children, it doesn't matter, right? And if you are going to physically condition them, it depends. You have to know what your child's like, what they're sensitive with. Sometimes you just hold them on the shoulder, squeeze their shoulder a little bit, nudge them a little bit. But in my practice and what my understanding of the way I grew up, I don't do that to my daughters. I think that girls are very different than boys, obviously. But I think that physical conditioning for girls is completely wrong. And I think for boys, it's legitimate as long as it's not something repetitive. What I mean by repetitive is, look, when I get angry with some of my boys, I don't like hit them for pain. It's more for like shame. And I know some parents do that. I don't know how they do it, where they do a repetitive hitting type thing. Like one time, like the thing is, with me, I'll physically condition my children by like pushing them or like holding them by the neck and doing something, not over the front, from the back, like go do this because maybe they kicked their mother or maybe they threw something at their mom or something like that. They're still young. But the repetitive hitting thing is weird, where a parent is like spending 5 minutes beating up their child. That's weird. I don't know how parents do that, because as soon as I see like my kids are about to cry, I like get a little weird. I just have to stop, like even if I'm sometimes yelling at them in a certain way. So there's a lot to unpack here, but the first thing is, I think it's a generational thing, the hitting thing. And sometimes we see the way our parents conditioned us. We actually love them for it, because times I think we're very different. The next thing is, what do you think about that as far as a daughter is witnessing you being a little more harsh with the sons, but with her it's a little different. The treatment is different. You obviously love all of your children, but you love them in a different way, but you love all of them, right? What do you think about that, first and foremost? Yeah. As a principal and as everybody in the house witnessing that the boys are getting a different type of treatment than the girls.
So I'm not a parent, so it's a little, I'll mention.
But even like theoretically.
Yeah. Theoretically, when it comes to this physical punishment, so when I say physical punishment, I mean hitting, like a slap, a punch, a belt.
Yeah, no punching, no belts.
Absolutely. I do not recommend that as a means of discipline for anyone, from a legal perspective and just a trauma perspective. In terms of physical condition, in the sense of like a hand, right? That's different. Yeah. That is a level of asserting, hey, this is a serious matter. As for how it goes between girls and boys, I think you mentioned it, based on the personality, and people respond to some things differently. Some people need something a little more intense for them to realize, hey, this is part of the parenting. Yeah. But I think going back to the trauma aspect, right? It's not just that the people the women I'm working with were slapped around a bit. It's and people react to traumas differently. Some people can come out on the other side and be like, yeah, I'm fine, right? They had developed that level of resilience. But it's more so that it represented a certain level of neglect where they weren't feeling safe. So if you come home and you don't know, am I getting the happy, loving dad today, or am I getting the dad that is going to slam my head into a wall today? You're in an environment where you're constantly having to watch, right, for different stimuli. And you can't even operate normally. Your body has to send you into fight or flight to be able to react when things happen, to protect you. That's what they're doing. That's what they're dealing with. And we are not meant to deal with that overwhelming experience over a long time. Adrenaline, which is, the hormone that the fight or flight hormone, is supposed to be a temporary spike. It's supposed to come right back down after the threat is over. Imagine having that over a long period of time. It screws up your hormone.
With the person being in front of you all the time, or just being related to them, being under their house.
Not even that. At one point they can be gone, but your brain learned the patterns of safety from them, and so now you go out into the world, and the way you operate in the world is based off of those old patterns. Yeah. So you're always in fight or flight, or freeze or fawn.
So is that generally the clients that you have, or people of the age that are children living with their parents, or
No.
Okay.
I have, they're all adults. Some are living with their children, some are not. Some, I'm working with physicians. I'm working with mental health professionals.
Okay.
Funny enough, this is my first cohort too, but funny enough, they're all in helping professions. That's, I don't think
Wow, that's
that's not a
interesting.
coincidence.
They're helping, meaning they're in like humanitarian work and like public work and like that, like service.
Medicine, mental health,
Oh wow.
teaching, like that.
So are most of your are most of your patients, their root cause is through parents?
Clients,
Or
yeah, most of them. Vast majority of them have linked something to their parents because that's their childhood, right?
But what do you think that connection is? Why are they in a helping field and they all have? You said it's not a coincidence. What do you think that connection is?
I think when you're someone who is traumatized and you recognize it, because the thing about what makes therapy and the work I do are very different, because people coming to me know they have a problem, know kind of what the problem is, and willing to do anything to fix it, where it's therapy, you spend time maneuvering. When you know that you're traumatized and you feel like crap all the time, you do not want other people to feel like that, until you will sacrifice yourself for that cause. Also, in some cases, certain fields are prestigious, and if you're someone who learned to protect yourself, if you're the good kid, you might go into high achieving careers, and being a physician is one of those, right? Just to get people off your back, make things a little safer for you.
So
These are subconscious, yeah.
I mean, what level of, can you give us some examples of what kind of abuse? Because abuse has become so broad and even trauma has been used so liberally in society now, and everyone's trying to use that to further their cause or whatever message they have. But can you give us some examples of at least what a broad body of your clients are experiencing in relation to? Now, I fully understand there's some maniac parents out there, but do you feel like, is there also some manageable issues where, there was just some pretty normal discipline that was happening that the patient maybe, has an exaggerated version of it in their mind,
I see what you're saying.
So these are clients rather than patients, just to clarify once more. So
No, I thought I said clients.
you said patients.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I said something like that too.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so
Client patients, let's call them.
I can't.
She's
call
trying
them
to protect
patients 'cause I'm
herself,
not-
bro.
I'm
She's
not-
trying to protect
literally,
herself.
yeah.
I just realized that
For
when
the
she said one more
purposes of the
time.
video, anytime I ever say patients,
He
I
means
mean client.
Yes. Go ahead.
Do
So,
not sue
yeah.
Sister Hana.
Please no. Yeah. So when quick clarification here, right? Sometimes we'll say, maybe it wasn't that bad. Trauma is not based on the severity of the event. It's based on the severity of the nervous system reacting to the event, and that's based on a multitude of factors that we can't always measure, right?
And everybody may be different too.
I mean, there's genetic predisposition. Some people just have a lower threshold for anxiety. There's an entire host of just long-standing environmental influences that none of us were there to witness, right? So it might not seem bad to us, but we are always looking at it through a lens of what we experienced. So if my dad smacked me around, but my dad was overall very, very loving, that's a very different thing than someone who got smacked around and was also dealing with an emotionally neglectful parent. So it ranges. I mean, I have clients that were had family members that were taken by the state because of the abuse, who were being choked out by their parents, right? By their father specifically.
And these are Muslims and non-Muslims?
Muslims. I only work with Muslim women.
Wow, subhanAllah.
Yeah. Then I have on the other side where it was just very emotionally detached. Like I did not feel, and I know a lot of us experience this, so it's very common for some people to be like, yeah, I got through it, it's fine. But it wasn't meant to be like that. parenting is supposed to be an emotional thing, at least if you're getting it from one parent, right? So usually it's a mother who's a little more emotionally giving. If we cannot seek that safety out from our parents, we don't learn how to seek it out from other people, or we try to seek it out from other people and we become victims because of that. We become people can take note, oh, this is someone who's easily manipulatable, right? This is why individuals who are traumatized, especially women who are traumatized, are much more likely to end up in a domestic violence situation, right? It's okay, this person seems like they're going to love me, and they don't realize that they're actually identifying someone who's much more likely to hurt them because of those patterns in their head.
Wow,
are
that's
operating.
crazy.
Yeah,
I didn't know about
this
that.
is one of the and actually we can jump into talking about fatherlessness, right? Which is another parental trauma, the absence of a father. We don't talk about this a lot, the importance of fathers. So I can't stand when women say men ain't ish, or F all guys, or men are pigs, or whatever. It really makes me, it really upsets me, because the importance of the presence of a father, the research is unanimous. Your absentee father makes it more likely that your child is going to be a drug addict, drop out of school. If it's a girl, get pregnant, teenage pregnancy, end up with a substance use disorder, end up with an anxiety disorder or depressive mood disorder. It's horrific. And so that is another contributing factor. So not having an emotionally present parent, and feeling like you as a child have to figure things out all by yourself, like we're adultifying children, I guess we could say, very early on. Children are not meant for that.
Yeah.
Those complex issues are supposed to be dealt with. Yeah.
I know, like, there's so many episodes where we talked about, this pandemic of fatherless homes and social decay that occurs from it. But one other thing that I think, especially as fathers, just as a responsibility, is that, in my mind, is there may be fatherless homes, and those children, they can't control that. But as far as fathers who run their homes, if they are the individual that's making it as if the child wish it was a fatherless home, right? The very, very, very abusive. Like we were talking about the parents, like our parents were very loving to us. That's why when they smacked us, we didn't mind. And when we grew up, we're like, man, I'm so glad. I wish they were harsher with me. Yeah. And I wish they pushed me to do a lot more, because I know I could have done a lot better, because they were too nice to me. Yeah. Right?
It's different with girls. Like,
it's much more different with girls. It's much different with girls.
I mean, like for boys, we're about kind of, I don't know, with that tenacity or
they're kind of like bros with us too, our sons, but at the same time if we need to see if they're doing something very wrong, we need to give them chances. But at the same time, you just treat them like you would want to be treated, because this is what I tell my children all the time. I don't want to go off a tangent, but my boys especially, I always tell them that this may seem harsh to you right now. This doesn't have to do with punishments, right? This has to do with schooling or whatever the case is I'll give you a small example. My son, he didn't want to go to his class because he said I was feeling a little sick and nauseous. I said, it doesn't matter, you're going to class, it's fine. After you come back, you're going to feel fine and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, no, I can't, I'm not feeling good, I'm feeling nauseous. And I kind of knew what he was feeling, and I was like, he'll be fine, right? The problem is that I know that when I was younger, those kind of things really weakened me, and I can see the weakness in me now because my parents were so nice, especially my mother, But then after he got back, as he feel better, right? I was like, yes. Yeah. I told him, look, I don't want you to be in a situation when you grow up where you felt that you could have been pushed, but I didn't push you enough. But I'm not going to push you where I'm going to harm you. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to put you in any type of jeopardy, right? And I think that's really important for children to understand. But I think for fathers, just to seal this point, is we have a big responsibility, because we can cause, I think, those same issues, especially in our daughters, but our children in general, that if we're not loving to them, especially when they need love, if we don't give them attention, especially when they need attention, they can have those same, fight or flight things that I think that you're talking about, right? Those are the symptoms.
My
I think
son
the camera
is,
went off. I don't know.
Sorry?
Oh, it's there. Oh,
good.
never mind. Oh, my bad.
Go ahead.
So I was going to say, we go back to, I'm getting a phone.
You have to take it?
No, it's.
You can silence it.
You can cancel this, right? Yeah.
Just it's from you. It's that phone. It's your phone.
Oh.
That's funny.
Wow. There's a gin here.
So I was going to say, it goes back again to the emotional neglect aspect, right? I would push back on the idea that men don't deal with it as much, because I have a lot of guys actually who are asking if I'm going to open it up for men. And I'm not a man, and I'm very well aware that I think there is an attempt to feminize resilience and like just tell men like to get through whatever you need to get through. You got to do it just like a woman does, right? So go to the therapy, do like all of those things. I believe that there's something different there, and men are going to have to be the ones to figure out what that process is. But people are asking for it, and I think it's important for it, like if your son was to say to you, right, maybe like, Dad, I love, what does he call you, Baba?
Abu.
I love and appreciate that you're disciplining me, or you care about me to the extent that you don't want me to be weak, but I'm actually feeling like for me it's not helping, and I'd like to try this way. Like, could he come to you with and have that kind of conversation with you?
Yeah, I think he could.
Okay. So that's the big difference, right?
Yeah.
That's what is different. A lot of people couldn't do that.
Mm.
Like, hey, you doing this to me is actually worse than, like, I'll say I have a client who has a child who you can tell he's very anxious at baseline. Those methods with him probably would not work, and in fact could push him out over the edge and make it even more destructive. So
I think that's where the awareness of the parents comes.
Exactly.
They have to have
Exactly.
that understanding of the child,
Exactly.
right? But when is it like, so this is like opening up so many doors for me, right? So when how do we know that a child's ready to tell us that is pushing him away? Like, what do they actually know what's good for them, right? I'm not saying that parents are perfect, right? We're still learning every day as being parents, right? But sometimes we know full well that something's really good for them, and they think it's not good for them. So how do we find that balance in correcting? It's like if my son came to me, like he's only 10 years old, right? As right now. But if he came to me and said, you know what, I think what you're doing is actually pushing me away. The conversation I would have with him is, look, I'm glad you were able to come up with that answer, but you're still going to school. If he was like
15, 16, 17.
Yeah, and depending on his intelligence too, right? Like 15-year-old, I wouldn't trust myself, but him 15-year-old, I'm pretty sure he's gonna be a lot sharper than I was. So that'd be different, yeah. But I think it comes with maturity to understanding themselves also,
Ask
right?
him why. Ask why. Why do you think it's right? And then from there, you are still the parent. You can delineate, is that why strong enough, right? Why? Because you're making me go and I don't feel good and da-da-da. It's like, okay, how about this? You'll go, or I'll give you something for medication for the nausea or whatever. If you still feel really bad, you can call me and I'm going to show up and bring you home if you really feel bad. Otherwise, let's see how it goes, right?
Yeah.
And now your child feels, okay, there's a safety there. I know it seems like, okay, we're overcomplicating people. Honey, why are you overcomplicating this? Because
I think it's great advice. I think it's great advice.
complicated,
Yeah.
right?
It's
and
not
now
easy.
there's a trust. Now it's, my dad really does have my best interest at heart. And they're actually more likely psychologically to go through with it because they have your backing, right? And that's how
So my son, for example, he's 13. Really good behaved boy. Sheikh Hammer knows him. Hangs out with us all the time. He's disciplined with me is if he even senses that I'm irritated with him or just raised my voice a couple decibels above, it's like a spanking. Like he knows.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm just wondering,
gotta get it
like,
together.
I hope this isn't interpreted as trauma, like me getting irritated.
not necessarily, right? 'Cause
I'm like, what? Because
you see the worry on his face, that's why.
Well, I remember being worried after I getting a spanking when I was a kid. And I'm like, that could have been trauma. But then I'm like, wait, what if this gets interpreted as trauma? Like, am I just not supposed to react with kids anymore? So it's difficult. I know, I understand, like, there's real trauma that's, of course, happening with the clients that the sister's experiencing, but or has relationships with that are genuinely, these are horrible individuals who have abused their daughters, right? But I'm just like,
not
wait,
necessarily horrible either.
Oh, they're not horrible.
Some of them are. This is where we jump into the concept of generational trauma. You can love your kids to death and still be repeating patterns that are harmful because you learned them from your parents.
Well, their actions are horrible.
Yes. I'd say the way I was like holding on to my left because I was waiting for you to say something. So in regards to your son, again, the underlying is their emotional neglect. He's not necessarily going to be traumatized because his dad was mad and he noticed it. But I would say, and I would caution parents to take note of, is you're training the patterns. So depending on how, it's one thing if like your son reacts like that because he respects you specifically. It's another if he's anxious at baseline and then that's how he reacts. And now he's being conditioned that in other circumstances, if someone feels that way, he is going to, if his boss gets a little angry or his coworker or whatever, how is he going to respond? We have to be very mindful of our discipline methods because of that. And if he is a fighter, he'll stand his ground. Someone's angry, okay, let's talk about it, let's figure it out, right? If he's a fawner, fawning is a very interesting.
Sorry, how do you spell that, fawning?
Fawn. Fawn, like
okay,
like
fawn.
a
Okay,
deer
yeah, fawn.
kind
Okay,
of thing,
okay.
right? Fawning is this trauma response, which is so clever, where the person will basically, they'll nicify things. They'll, oh no, it's fine. I'll get you right. They'll go overboard to make things at peace, so they don't have to deal with the trauma. They don't have to, right? So you start getting
put
angry.
a layer over.
Yeah, these are the people pleasers, and it's one thing I always, because I talk about people pleasing a lot too. You can be nice, you can be respectful. I think it's very important. I consider myself a very kind person. Mm-hmm. But when you're doing it out of a powerlessness because you're afraid, that's a very different thing.
Yeah, that's a defensive
And you might
thing.
be training your children to react that way to other people, and then not you necessarily or you, but to parents in the crowd or future parents. You might be training them, and then you're training the weakness in them because now they're people pleasing to protect themselves, and they never had the opportunity to practice with you, because you are their practice ground as a parent, how to stand up for themselves, how to regulate themselves when someone's angry and be like, okay, what did I do? How to not drown in shame. That's another thing. There is something called toxic shame. It's one thing if I did something wrong, and I'll give an example, right? This was a funny trauma response to think about. But when I was a kid, and I'm sure all of this happened with a lot of us, if I knocked something over accidentally, my parents would rage, okay? Now, in my 20s, I remember this distinct experience where I had like a spoon on the counter. It fell over, it hit the ground, it clinged, and I automatically did this, waiting for the scream, right? So that's not something that necessarily traumatized me, but that is a trauma. My body.
It's a pattern that's been built.
Exactly. My body went to fight or flight, waiting for the screaming, right? That's what we're doing with our children. We're building those patterns of how they respond to things, and depending on the underlying factors, that could lead to a trauma developing. And then I had to literally train myself out of that.
So my next question would be, like, sometimes I look at a lot of things, and there's two things, right? Mm-hmm. The first is that how much is too much when we're trying to fix a person's I know fix is not the right word, but heal a person's personality, because all of us are just an amalgam of a whole bunch of experiences, and we're the end result every second right now in the present, right? Based on, for instance, hearing a spoon drop and waiting for something, right? So every single one of us has these built patterns within us, right? How much of it, number one, are we to solve? Because it seems like that's our whole person. Every single one of us has a pattern to something in every element of our life, in every experience, right? That we've built.
Everyone's going to experience trauma.
Yeah.
Some people just process it, and some people are able to process it, and some people it's too overwhelming to their nervous system to process it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing, thank you for that. The other thing is that, look, this is something really funny, but I mean, kind of humorous. It's something that happens in my house all the time. We always joke about this. Is that, you know, like you go on like 294 and you see those billboards for hair loss and all that kind of stuff, right? So my wife and kids, they obviously joke around, and they're like, you know, every time they say that, you know, have you thought of doing this method, do this method? You know, my wife, she kind of jokes around about that. I was like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. It's fine. I like the way it is, you know? She's like, maybe you should try. I was like, no, I'm not going to try it, you know? Especially when we go to these billboards, like, you know, they'll like make it like a side comment and stuff. I was like, those people are evil because they've capitalized on something that there's nothing wrong with, just so they can make money off of you, right?
Evil or smart?
Well, smart evil, like shaitan. So like, but you understand what I'm trying to say, right? It's like that's with everything. That's a whole big other topic of capitalism, of honing into people's senses, finding something wrong, and then making money off of it, right? Or building a service off of it, right? And some services obviously are very necessary, right? So how many issues are we actually seeing? How do we protect ourselves from digging into somebody, their psyche, their social, their emotional, and telling them that that's a problem? Like, what's the gauge that we see so that we can be completely honest and we can be in front of, I'm not talking about you, I'm just talking about in general, right? I think your service obviously is very necessary.
Even if it wasn't necessary, and my maybe I'm a capitalist. I think if people are willing
we all
to,
are, unfortunately, but
if people are willing to pay for a service and think it's going to provide them a benefit in their life, let it, as long as it's not haram, and I'm just like, go for it. Did you finish?
Yeah, so I'm saying that how do we actually determine how much digging are we actually doing to know that if it's actually a problem, it's not a problem that we're trying to heal? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good question. A very good question. And I think part of it is the way this is actually psychiatry in general. So I do have psychiatric training. That's
Okay.
part of actually primary care is you do psychiatry. In psychiatry, when we do these intake forms with our patients, so this is patients, not clients, we ask how much is it affecting your life? That's how you know, right? My clients, I don't go out and ask people, hey, come join the program. They come to me because they're saying, this is taking over my life. I am a physician and I should be able to just practice medicine and not be freaking out. I know I'm high achieving. I know I'm strong. I know, but I can't function. I can't sleep. I'm anxious all the time. My relationship with so-and-so is just feeling very unhealthy. What do? I don't know what to do, right? I've tried this. Nothing is working, right? And you're funny. You were talking about the hair loss thing. This brings to another thing. Like at a certain point, your body's going to tell you something's wrong, right? When I was getting sick in the way that I'd never gotten sick before, I'm not like, I don't smoke. I don't have diabetes. I've never done a single drug in my life. I don't have risk factors for these kinds of things. And yet, my health was going to crap in my early 20s, and that was terrifying for me. Your body will tell you, because that constant fight or flight it's releasing hormones, it's releasing adrenaline, it's spiking your cortisol, and your body is not supposed to have that happening for a long time. So you mentioned the hair loss thing. One of the most common symptoms of like the physical symptoms of complex PTSD is hair loss, because halas, your body doesn't care about nourishing your hair and your skin and blah blah blah. It's trying to keep your heart pumping because there's a constant threat.
Wow, that's crazy. I never thought of that.
It's literally, and one of my clients, part of why she came to work with me, why she joined the group coaching, was she was going to early menopause. She should not be going into early menopause. She's not there yet. She's like, that's terrifying, because her cortisol was spiked. Cortisol is your stress hormone, you guys. We always have a baseline of cortisol. You would die without it. You need it.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be on a trend, right? It goes up, and then it goes down to the point where sleeping, and then it spikes in the morning. That's cortisol. She actually had her cortisol drawn, and it was above elevated. For someone who's suffering from trauma, your body's going to tell you your cortisol is constantly spiked.
So the trauma induced her to go into early menopause.
Yes,
that's crazy.
Because it threw her body into.
Can it be reversed, or is it just?
I think she's early enough with enough. The somatic sensory processing, nervous system regulation, certain medical interventions in terms of supplementation, all of that good stuff over a long period of time. Yeah, I do believe it will be reversed, inshallah. So that's why I caution anyone who's watching this, right? And when you judge the extent of someone's trauma, it's not that big or it's this big. You can't, because their body is going to be the judge, right? And that's why I don't. Anytime I remember. Someone said this, it's like, just because what I went through isn't the same or more is not as intense as what you went through doesn't mean that it didn't affect me, right?
Yeah.
It's like you can't solve. Yeah.
What I've discovered, or at least just thinking about this kind of stuff, is that there's like a baseline that everyone is born with, that is or their ability to withstand traumatic life events, and everyone's different in how they process this stuff, and like, you can't say that because of your ability to handle the same type of trauma, let's just say a loss of a parent or something like that, and someone else's inability to cope with that kind of a loss is, that it diminishes them, or that they were probably, inshallah, they were given strengths in other areas, but this particular thing was, I was just hearing about someone who, a brother who dealt with 2 children he lost, and then he ended up getting leukemia later, and was paralyzed for a number of years until his he was able to get some physical therapy done and start walking again. And listening to his story, I was just like, wow, this is like a real life story of that prophet, Ayub alayhi salam. And I was just like, wow, and then, like, you would think, and he's living a successful life. He's in I don't want to give away his identity, so I'm not. But he's a very successful professional. He's doing well for himself, and I was just like, wow, man, this person is he was a bit. He was able to carry it on, but he was also, deeply religious too. So he was able to withstand all these traumatic life events and carry on. Whereas, if I experienced that, I would be a mess, And it's just crazy, like this baseline that everyone's born with, their ability. So you can't
the threshold.
Yeah, because I know among guys is like they look at each other and just kind of like smirk, like, okay, I dealt with that, guys have this thing like, I could do that, like I handled that, like, man up. And so there's some things that guys at least have to work on, even if they haven't dealt with traumatic events, that they need to
empathy.
Yeah, practice some empathy and realize like, hey, everyone's different, and just because your experiences with even the females in your life, whether it's your mom, wife, etc., and their ability to handle traumatic life events doesn't carry over. It doesn't, especially in Western society where you don't have the adversity that's kind of conditioning you repeatedly. Like across the world, across the Muslim world, there's so many events, whether it's floods, earthquakes, wars, all kinds of things that kind of build up that personality to withstand traumatic events. You're not experiencing that, so your baseline is always low. You're not building up yourself to withstand these events. So that's why a lot of people, you'd think, like, for example, a society like Iraq would be a hot mess, just with all the bombs that America dropped on their country and stuff. You'd be like, wow, this society must be ravaged. And then ISIS came on afterwards, and you're like, what could be? I'm sure they have a lot of PTSD and stuff. I'm not saying they don't experience that at all, but just to have a functioning society after experiencing so many horrific events over a number of years, you're like, wow, it's subhanAllah, it's, you have to understand that it has to be Islam that really is holding these people together.
No, I agree, man.
But in terms of like actual coaching mechanisms, how are you like implementing the seerah or the sunnah in your clients' lives? How are you? What kind of advice do you give them?
Yeah. Can I mention something before that? You sparked a thought. So we were talking about empathy. The Prophet, you want a model for anything that you need to do in terms of men interacting with men. Look at the Prophet. He never looked someone coming to complain about a problem. He never looked at them like, boy, I just lost my wife. He never did that, right? He was present with them. He listened to them. He gave them the tools that they needed to be able to cope with whatever stress they were dealing with. Have you guys ever heard of epigenetics?
Yeah.
You guys are familiar, like know what it is? And
why don't you just give it to the audience?
For the audience. So epigenetics is basically the concept that we all have our DNA, and we all have genes, and genes are actually turned on or off based on environmental factors. So you can have someone actually who is genetically predisposed to, if they ever experience trauma, to go psychotic, actually. But they live a life where they never experience trauma. It's a very easy life. That gene never gets turned on. We have found majority, this is the beautiful thing about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, is we have so much autonomy in what we can do, because our environment is what's affecting a majority of our genes, and we can shape our environment. We do have power to a certain extent to shape our environment. I just mentioned that because another thing about why we're hearing all about trauma and this and that, the environment we exist in now is very different than the environment that you guys grew up in as children, and even me as children. And it goes well beyond what we talk about. The things we're breathing in, the food that we eat, what's in our food, the fact that we have a computer in our pocket all the time that gives us more bad news than people have received in an entire lifetime.
That's true.
That is disrupting our physiology. And I practice Western medicine. I give Western medicine a lot of credit. It's incredible that we can stop a heart attack from killing someone. We can stick a wire in their heart and their arteries and stop it. But at the same time, there's a lot left on the table in terms of what we're learning about whole body medicine, and people are learning that, and that affects our ability to deal with trauma too. Because if all of this garbage is turning on genes that make us less resilient, Well, now we have that, and we have to cope with the actual experiences we're living. So that being said, you said, well, how do I intersect it with Islam? Islam gives an incredible framework for healing trauma. I mean, we talked about the tahajjud aspect, right? So the way I intersect it with Islam is, one, we talk a lot about certain mindsets you have to have. When it comes to we hear this a lot, right? What is patience and the importance of having patience? The fact that when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, "Inna ma'al usri yusra," that indeed with hardship comes eases. What does that even mean? How do we believe that? What is tawakkul? What needs to precede tawakkul? This idea of trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are questions I'm getting asked and formulating answers to, right? To be able to form tawakkul, you need to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you don't know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can't trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you don't know Allah is al-Kareem, then you're not going to have tawakkul that He's going to be generous with you when you're struggling with finances, or if you don't believe He's al-Razaq. If you don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Wadud, then when you're being abused by your parents, and you don't believe that love is even something that people have a capacity for, because that's all you ever knew, right? So those are like the mindset aspects of it. I teach my clients somatic sensory processing techniques, but I also incorporate with deen. So I give them, for example, one thing we do is a methodology of how to use salah as your somatic sensory processing, right? Take 3 deep clearing breaths before you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you're going in to make wudu, be intentional about the fact that you're about to do salah. That intentionality is important. Slow down your recitation. If you're someone who doesn't know Arabic or understand Arabic, go read what you're about to recite. So learn Surah Fatiha's meaning. So as you're reciting, you can actually focus on the word. As you're moving from standing to ruku' to back up to sujood, focus on the movements. Breathe slowly. There's yoga, and I know it's really it's weird to say this, but yoga is actually one of the most well-researched trauma integration techniques, somatic sensory processing techniques. Your salah and your movement, be focused on it. When you're in sujood, speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about what's stressing you, right? Use His name so you're reminded, you're doing a resilience practice, right? Here's what's bothering me, here's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to affect it. That is something easily that everyone who's watching this can integrate in terms of processing stress, right? That's one. 2 is, Allahumma salli Muhammad. There's a lot of advice that the Prophet ﷺ gave in terms of lifestyle. So outside of the somatic sensory processing, that if we adopt it, we build our resilience and our ability to tolerate the symptoms of our trauma a lot better. So even just the basics of eating, right? Not eating to your fill. So you're not sluggish, and you're not diverting blood flow from your brain to your stomach for hours at a time, and losing the ability to be patient with someone, and then you're constantly being set off, right? I know it seems simple. It seems simple, but it's really, this is where the biohacking comes in, actually, subhanAllah.
Yeah, so that's something I actually have asterisks on it in my notes for biohacking. But before we get into that, I think you mentioned actually something very profound. As far as slow recitation, there's one thing you notice is whenever you're in a hurry or you're stressed out, you read a lot faster, especially when you're praying on your own.
Yeah. So or when you're stressed and talking, people talk faster.
Yeah, a lot faster, right? But Rasulullah ﷺ, especially in his tahajjud, where he'd be praying alone, he used to read slow. Now, someone could say, okay, how do I read slow? Well, the instruction in the sunnah is so beautiful, is that he used to read with mad. Mad means that when you're reading with, something that has a waw and a noon in it, we in tajweed refer to it as sitta harakat, right? Like 6 letters worth, or almost not 6 seconds, but if you were to say the length of 6 alifs, for instance, right? So the 2 harakat would be Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, right? 4 harakat would be Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and then 6 harakat. This is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to read with this in his entire tahajjud. And it's optional, you don't have to, but it's a way to slow down, and it's for tadabbur, it's for thinking deeply about the Quran, right? So imagine every single verse of his, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, 6 harakat, right? Or even a little longer than that, of what I just read. So the thing is that slowing down itself is actually meant to give you a tool within the Quran to think deeply about the Quran itself. It's in the recitation.
There's something you brought to mind, actually. So there's a somatic sensory processing technique, and you guys, this isn't woo-woo science. Even if it's not familiar to you, there's a lot of very strong data on this, and it's something called the VU breath. So literally, they'll teach people when you are feeling dysregulated, you start going VU like that. You'll hear, you remember people meditating going right?
Yeah.
you know, you were the whole point is it's a resonancing, and that
Yeah.
is extremely regulating to your nervous system. It stimulates your vagus nerve, which is the nerve that helps bring you from fight or flight to rest and
Subhanallah.
digest. When you're reciting, recite Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Yeah, the
Do you hear-
vibration,
do
the
you-
reverberation, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
is, do you like? This is why I'm saying we failed as a community when it comes to this, because it's right there. And and then I don't know if you guys would hear this. People would be like, there was this whole movement earlier on when we were just starting to talk about mental health as a community, that mental health has nothing to do with iman. That's not true. That's not true. Yes, someone can be extremely faithful. Yes, and be have mental health issues. That's true.
Yeah, I've seen that multiple times.
But the opposite, to be faithless and not have and be mentally fine, that's not something. So we should.
Wait, what do you mean that's not something? I want you
Yeah.
to clarify that. I just want to make sure I understand that correctly. So if somebody doesn't have faith or doesn't believe
Yeah.
in
If you're, so let's say you're a Muslim who moves away from faith,
Okay.
you should be developing mental issues,
see.
mental health issues.
That's
You
phenomenal.
should, because you are disconnecting yourself from as-salam, the source of peace, right? You should, and I have so many. I mean, I'm slowly. I just recently got into social media in terms of my presence, and I see what people are like. I feel disconnected from Allah, and they're so sad. And it's like, okay, start reconnecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It seems simple, but you don't have to feel it to do it, right? Get up and pray, even in the feeling will come later on. But that's just something I noted with the way we think about mental health. To tell people, we shouldn't say just make dua. We should say make dua and XYZ. Here are the other things, tools Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. Here's how
Yes.
we use the body, the brain that Allah gave us to deal with this catastrophic experience, right?
Yeah.
And the final thing, I'm sorry for like going on and on about this,
that's all
guys, but I had a client who said this, right? She was someone who actually struggled. Like, her story is really is sad. It's hard, and this is outside of group coaching, but she had, and this, I also mentioned this in my group coaching call actually, but she, one of my clients was like, I'm just going to make dua. I'm just going to make dua. And I remember I was like, what do you mean you're just going to make dua? Just, right? We say just when something's not a big deal, right? If I told you I'm just gonna go to a 2-week $5,000 trauma routine, you'd look at me like, what? Is 5,000 not a lot for you? Is being able to take 2 weeks? That's dua is literally the destiny changer. As Muslims, we have a tool that allows us to divert calamity from us, right? The whole hadith about 3 things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he'll answer your dua, he'll save it for Yawm al-Qiyamah, he'll divert a calamity. Why are we so disconnected and immune from what Allah gave us as a gift, right? How many times have you guys gone through something difficult, or people watching in the audience gone through something difficult and made dua, and then you can say, Allah delivered me through that difficulty because of my dua. Like how merciful Allah is.
Directly or indirectly, but you were taken out of it, yeah.
Exactly. But we look at it like it's something small.
No,
This is
I
why I'm
agree.
very big on like faith and mental health are connected, and we need to be very cognizant of how we explain that to people, especially nowadays where a lot of people didn't even grow up in houses that are faithful.
Gives a different, beautiful meaning to the hadith of Rasulullah, ad-du'a mukh al-ibadah, right? The dua is, mukh has multiple meanings, right? In contemporary Arabic and colloquial Arabic, it can be used as brain, or sometimes used as brain, but it's like the inner matter of like, sometimes like even marrow, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so ad-du'a mukh al-ibadah, it's basically the brain or the control or the center of ibadah. It's the core of ibadah, right?
In the recitation of the Quran, it's mentioned that the recitation is a cure. And when I was experiencing a traumatic life event, when I was reciting the Quran, I looked at the verses that meant the most, or I connected the most with, and kind of jumping onto what you were saying, like in sujood, I would recite those specific ayahs. Because in sujood, you don't have to you can say anything you want, right? You could make dua. A lot of people have this misconception they just have to say subhana rabbil a'la.
Dhikr and dua,
Yeah. So you can make dua, and you could make recite those ayahs repeatedly. And I think this is something some of the Sufis had figured out from long ago, where many type of dhikr and ways to recite Quran can ease in or cause tranquility in the heart, right? And I think there's something to that. I know there's people, whether you're a Sufi or not, I think there's benefits that you could gain from some of those ancient mystics who studied some of these things that brought peace to their heart. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I agree with you 100%. So look, when Allah says in the Quran, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْعَالَمِينَ, right? We reveal to you in this Quran, which is shifa and rahmah. Alameen doesn't mean human beings. It's for everybody. It's for everything. Everything that exists. Because everything is a soldier of Allah. Everything is a servant to Allah, right? And a slave to Allah. But somebody doesn't have to understand in order for Quran to be shifa for them. And the evidence also for that is, for somebody who doesn't understand, somebody who needs ruqya, like ruqya sharia, right? There's literally a manifestation of a shaitan or a jinn, whatever the case is, or black magic, or ayn, hasad, whatever the case is. And the Quranic recitation is the healing process of the person who's listening to the Quran. They don't have to understand it. Understanding is a whole different thing too, which is very necessary if you want to take it to a next level. But is the Quran, somebody listening to it, is it enough shifa for somebody? Yes, because Allah says it is, right? But to make it much more visceral and something that's going to be very proactive in changing your life, yeah, you should. How many of you have actually like read something of the Quran? You read it all the time, but then you actually read it and just read the tafsir of it. And you're like, well, I never knew that it actually meant that, and it actually changes a paradigm within you, changes the way you look at things for probably the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that was only 5 seconds, and you've been reading for like 5 years, and just that 5 seconds of you just switching gears into this. Hey, let me research this part a little bit, and it changed everything, right? I think all of us, every Muslim generally has that time in their life, right? So that's very, very important. What you're referring to as the people who are mystics and stuff like that, look, people in the past in Islamic history, because of their delving into academia and Islamic academics and just being around people of very strong scholarship and good religious parents and justice and fairness, they actually were able to come up with things because there was a whole beautiful environment laid out for them, which was conducive to learning. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So those generations came out with things. And would it happen to be that there was a time frame that had to do a lot with tazkiyat al-nafs? Yeah, like Imam Ghazali's time, Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah's time. That time was a lot of books were written about purification of the soul and how you, and even that, the interesting thing is that, one of the things of tahajjud that Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah talks about is that even bodily ailments, getting up at night, washing yourself and standing in front of Allah and reciting and preferably shedding some tears, that actually gets rid of some physical and emotional ailments, right? And he says quite the contrary, lots of disobedience to Allah actually affects the rainwater that comes down to you, the vegetation that starts to have disdain for you because of you just being disobedient to their creator, right? So that's like some of the mystic stuff that you're talking about. What they actually developed was something that's not from outside of the Quran and Sunnah. They just had an environment which they were able to look at it because the previous generations paved a way for them, did all the homework, so now they can develop something new, right? But yeah, I think that's really important. Quran is, and I'm glad you mentioned that dua. The Quran is a big part of healing. But my question for you is, I know I've been talking about biohacking, but something else came to my mind is, what do you do with this situation of somebody who grew up in a religious family, in the sense of their parents used to make them pray or like be very excessive with them, name calling, very like harsh, like despicable language, like lots of physical abuse, especially if it's a girl, like lots of physical abuse, and went through like religious training and all that kind of stuff, and then leaves the fold of Islam because may had some, went through multiple divorces and all that kind of stuff, and then just left the fold of Islam, or kind of claimed but still feels like there's something there, but doesn't have anything to do with Islam, doesn't really live an Islamic lifestyle, what I'm saying,
like
at
maybe
all.
Muslim by name.
A Muslim, yeah, drugs, all that kind of stuff. A whole just wants to forget everything. So, but then that person can say, I'm this way because the religious upbringing I had made me have lots of disdain and all that kind of stuff for the religion and the people, parents, or whatever the case is, and I'm feeling better this way. So the fact that they're claiming that they're feeling better in that lifestyle, is that a type of evasion? What's happening there? Are they being truthful to themselves? Is it a blunder to them of what feels good and what doesn't feel good anymore? What is that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. That is a trauma response in and of itself, right? Because you're trying to seek something that's going to protect you. And I go live on TikTok. I try to do it weekly. If you guys are, if anyone's interested in ever joining one of those, I'm sure you guys will have the stuff in the show notes. But yes. I get this question all the time. And these are people that there's something that, like, I want to be connected to my deed. I want to feel
Muslims.
These are Muslims by Muslims by name. A lot of times it's around salah, right? Because that's like the one thing that people are like, okay, I know if I do this, at least I'm checking that fadl off. Two things. Number one is it happened to you, not because of you. And I think a lot of people take on such an intense amount of shame because it starts to feel like what they experienced in life was because of them. Like, and that is one thing we can, when children feel that, especially, it is horrendous for their psyche. It happened to you, not because of you. And because it happened to you, we talked about epigenetics, you can do certain things to impact the environment, to grow and heal from it, right? At the end of the day, we still have our own consequences, and we still have an aql, right? We still have a brain to decide what we are going to do. Our executive functioning is still there, right? Unless you get brain damage, then you're no longer accountable. So who cares if, yeah. So when I see situations like that, I would ask the person, do you truly want this? Because if you want this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to open up a path for you. There's no way that someone wants guidance and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to make it easy for them, right? But then two is, you're at the point where you need to separate emotion from action, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anyone here who's struggling with deen, and we come to deen and our spirituality with such a selfishness, like, it needs to make me feel better, it needs to make me feel good. I want to cry, I want to feel like I want to have that love and experience. I
don't get anything out of it. That's what I hear too. Yeah.
And guess what? If you're Muslim and if you're not Muslim and you don't believe, okay, who cares? You can deal with that on Yawm al-Qiyamah. If you're Muslim, honestly, if you're Muslim, you need to understand that everything that you're doing, even if it gave no benefit, even if Allah never allowed us to experience any good out of it, it's still a right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And your heart is beating every beat because of Allah. Every molecule of oxygen in your lungs is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You uphold the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and let that be enough of a non-negotiable for you to get yourself there. And out of the mercy and love and compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He still allows us to experience the sweetness of faith, right? So you pray enough times and you pray it with khushu' and you focus, and it's going to change your heart. It's going to, the whole hadith about, right, our heart, it can be blackened by sins, but what washes over it, what washes Quran and recitation, your dua, your connection, your evasion of sins because you know it's better for you. Even in the sense of self-improvement, and I say God-conscious self-improvement specifically because self-improvement without morality, to me, is inefficient. Because you secure your dunya, then you leave the akhirah wide open. And who wants to do that? Like, what's the point of that? That's why I can't stand a lot of, like, the self-improvement influencers and gurus who very materialistic in the way they present. It bothers me a lot. But a lot of people in the self-improvement game, like, when they started, they weren't great. Like, yeah, people who were like 300 pounds, right? And all of a sudden, what do they say? One day or day one, right? And they started and they weren't feeling it. They just got sick of where they were at, and they went went against the grain. They used some activation energy. And when I talk about discipline, I say you need to build your plan of discipline for the unmotivated version of you, not the motivated version of you.
You need to make a self-improvement plan for the
unmotivated version of you. So when you're excited to do something to change you, when you finally feel like, I'm going to get back on my deen, I'm going to do it, that's a motivated version of you. That version of you is being fueled by dopamine. Dopamine is our motivation it's a neurotransmitter. It helps us feel motivated. It's our happy hormone, right? Dopamine is temporary. It's not meant to be there for a long time. So when you're building your plan, you need to think, okay, how is the unmotivated version of me, the version before this moment, going to sabotage me? So I want to connect with Allah. I want to start praying again. I'm going to do it. Okay, I'm just going to get it done. Day 2, and you realize you haven't been doing this for years. So all of a sudden you're not just going to start. What can I do? Let me text a friend who I know prays. Hey, can you check in with me for 3 of the salah? right? And just ask me if I pray and give, hey, I need to wake up for Fajr and I'm struggling. Can I move my alarm or my phone to the hammam, to the bathroom? So that when I hear, I literally have to go there to make wudu, right?
And that's helping the unmotivated version.
Exactly.
By bringing somebody else in as a
This is a whole,
accountability partner type thing.
Yeah, there are a bunch of different ways, but think like you got to think. People are not stupid. That's the one thing. Like people know themselves and they know what's gonna. When I started weight training and weightlifting, right, and I was just getting into it, I was working my 12-hour shift. So my shift would end at 9 p.m. If I go home, I'm not going back out, right? So I would wear my gym clothes under my scrubs. That was for the unmotivated version of me, because I knew the long game, I'm going to play the long game. And that means I need to set up all these blocks for the unmotivated version of me not to win. And once I got there, so that's what I would say.
Yeah, my gym clothes have to be like, neatly organized, ready in a pile. If I am running around, if my mind has it in me that I have to run around looking for my gym clothes, like in the laundry or stuff, I'm not going to do it.
Hence the bag.
So everything is ready to go next to shoes and everything, boom.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's important.
So I like recognizing those stumbling blocks or anything that is preventing you to build any kind of habit. And eventually, I think, at least with your clients, you're coming to this, you're at least figuring out that many of them need to start implementing some healthy habits that can get them closer to Allah, bring that tranquility in their heart. And one of the amazing things is as well that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built into the human psyche is the ability to forget. You'd always get upset with yourself when you forget stuff, and you realize that forgetfulness is a mercy, because it helps you deal with these traumatic events.
Actually, the opposite, the opposite is when you are, so that to deal with difficult events. Sorry guys, I was just trying to pull up notes, but when you're traumatized, you can't forget. Your body won't let you forget, because this is the thing that needs to protect you from.
Oh, okay.
SubhanAllah. Yeah. That's just, it's. Yeah.
So how does someone know, like, they have, like for example, I got some tension in my shoulders or something, and repeated, like, there's no real cause for it. Like, I'm just, as you were talking, Sister Hana, I was like, I wonder if there's some kind of unresolved trauma that I need to sort out. How do I know it's not like a result of some trauma? Like, how are these what do they call psychosomatic events?
Yeah.
As a result of trauma, or maybe it's just an injury or something related to my musculoskeletal structure or whatever,
posture or whatever.
Posture. Yeah. Etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for a lot of people, you start off with an awareness journey and just noticing, right? So this is the first time you're noticing the tension in your shoulders. Now you're going to start noticing, hey, when does this happen, right? Because some people will notice my shoulders only get tense when I feel a little hostility towards the other person. That's not necessarily a trauma response all the time. It's also, it's a protective mechanism, right? We're leaning back into ourselves because we're kind of nervous something's about to happen. But that process of awareness is the starting point, and then you can start noticing, right? Let's say someone anxious attachment, someone's in a relationship. Why is it that every time my husband leaves for a trip, even though he told me, or vice versa, my wife is about to go somewhere, even though they told me exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it, and I know where they're going to be and blah, 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 that all of a sudden I go into a panic, right? You notice it's a pattern. And once you start noticing and you're aware of the pattern, then you can start investigating, where does this come from? There are a lot of tools to do that. There's actually there's a whole concept called inner child healing, which I also do with my group coaching clients, which is, let's go back. So are you guys familiar with inner child? Okay, so let's talk about it, because it's actually really cool. So the idea of an inner child is the idea that there is a version of you that is representative of the unmet needs of you when you were a child.
Okay.
And that version of us tends to take, it's not literally a second, but it's like our subconscious takes over when we feel threatened and those needs are brought up. So for example, if let me think. If you had a mother who was constantly criticizing and angry and cursed at you and insulted you, right? And you didn't respond to it. You never learned to respond to it. Like, okay, Mama, that's fine, right? But you would start raging and getting really angry and upset, right? As a kid. And now as an adult, someone insults you, and it's your friend, right? It's a joking insult. and you feel that coming up, like you're ready to defend yourself and you get very defensive and angry. That's your inner child coming up, right? So the idea of inner child healing is you need to reparent yourself, right? The things that this is specifically for childhood trauma, the things that your parents did not do for you, you're an adult now, meaning you have executive function, you get to make your own decisions, and you get to do those things for yourself. So what was the question you asked me that led me to? Oh, you were saying you were saying how do we know? So you move from awareness to investigating your inner child. What riles me up and why? Where does that come from? And could it be that it's something younger? And that's not to point blame at your parents. That's to say this is no longer serving you. It's not productive in your life. So let's figure that out and do something about it.
You know what that also requires? And you're absolutely right. It requires some honesty, because a lot of people.
It's radical honesty.
Yeah, a lot of people have just deluded versions of themselves. They're so. Yeah. They've made up so many lies. They might even be an honest person when you're speaking to them, but internally, what's holding them up, that their center, is packed with lies and just BS they've been telling themselves over the years about why they're good at something, or just whatever narratives that they've been spinning up, and just compounding on each other. And ultimately, you must have seen, at least from your clients, that the more honest an individual is, the farther they get in the coaching that you give them.
Yeah. And the thing about the honesty aspect of it is, right, it'll break you. And that's why people are so scared of it. I'd rather live the lie and be comfortable than have to let everything come to the surface and have my nervous breakdown. And this is why I do group coaching and not one-on-one coaching. One, because to deal with one-on-one trauma, it can be overwhelming for me. The group aspect of it is that there's accountability, and when you're starting to stumble and you're feeling vulnerable, there are people around you who are going to uplift you. Well, the idea of jama'ah, right, in our religion. But you're 100% right. It requires radical honesty. When I first started my journey, and my group coaching, like I mentioned, for the ladies, it's a 20-hour program. So you're learning a lot. We're kind of just scratching the surface, but I teach them a specific journaling technique. Not the journaling that you just put what's right on your mind. It's very specific in aligned with the way our brain has to process thoughts and how to reintegrate those thoughts. When I first was doing my trauma work, I was in PA school. I was doing my rotation. So these are 40-hour work weeks, basically. I'm coming home studying for my end of rotation exams, which are insane. And I kid you not, anywhere from 1 hour to 4 hours of this journaling technique. And the amount of discomfort because of the radical honesty that had to happen in that was so overwhelming. I remember I felt like I was shaking and I would just want to stop. And it's because all of that stuff was coming up. To be able to do that with a group is a whole other dynamic, and this is why having a friend who you can connect with too, even if you can't really access a space for healing trauma, that's important. And if you can't do it with a friend, you can't do it with a person, you can do it with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're true, and it's cheesy. You're never alone, but it's true, right? There are people that really, truly, they're not common, but can say that I don't have anyone I can rely on, and they mean it, right? I mean, I remember I had a patient who came in for a shoulder injury. And when I was asking her what was going on, she admitted to me that her boyfriend, her 200, 300-pound 6-foot-something tall boyfriend, picked her up and threw her on the ground. So it was very abusive. So I have to now investigate, did she dislocate her shoulder? I was like, is there anyone you can stay with? Is there any, right, you could go family? She's like, no, I'm a foster child. She didn't have anyone. Who did she have? She had her abusive boyfriend, who she was going back to. And you would give her the information, and here are the resources, and blah, blah, blah. But even in that situation, she wasn't religious. And in fact, her when she told me what she did for work, I was like, this is a risk factor, right? I don't know. I'm not going to say it on here. No, but it's...
The sad part is that she had to go through the foster system. Mm-hmm. And then somebody who the only person she probably has is this person, right? That's actually very difficult. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going through that type of situation. I mean, just the whole system of just being a foster child, and my heart, no matter who they are, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, I don't care. That really is that's it. If you were to imagine that your children had to live with somebody else, that's crazy for me to think about that. Like, as them being your parent, as them being the parents. So, I mean, that's a very unfortunate situation. Allah heal the hearts of those people. The
foster care system in America is absolutely horrendous, and that's what makes the attack on the family system in the United States even more disgusting is because the alternative of these broken families is that they go into the system where a huge number of these children end up sexually abused, drug addicts on the streets, like suicidal.
Yeah.
That's what the end result is.
A place that's supposedly supposed to help them. Yeah.
Do you talk about physical fitness with your clients? Are you?
Yeah, with the trauma group coaching, no, not necessarily. I'll ask them, is there something you physically that you do for your physical health? So I don't care if that's walking, running, yoga. Just as long as you have something that you're prioritizing. More so with my self-improvement kind of biohacking aspect, I talk a lot about physical fitness. Hugely passionate about it.
So, since you mentioned, but can I jump into
go ahead.
biohacking? Cool. So, the first time I heard about biohacking, I don't know if you remember when Dave Asprey first came out and he was talking about biohacking. That was
fraud.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he kind of is. I've been hearing him recently too. I see where he's a fraud and I see where he's not, but he's just really good at selling stuff. That's what he is.
I talked to his people on his team.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But at least the source material that some of that he got, there's legitimacy in that.
He's the first person I heard about biohacking from ever.
Yeah.
Him and like the Tim Ferriss's.
Yeah.
That was probably like around 2015, 2014. And obviously he used that to start selling his coffee and all that, the bulletproof coffee and all that. So biohacking, can you, for the uninitiated, can you explain to us and the audience what is biohacking?
I love biohacking.
Yes.
So biohacking, the way I describe it to people, because it's described as DIY biology. I think it's a horrible definition. It is the art and science of biophysical optimization. So lifestyle interventions, behavioral changes, diet and modifications, nutrition advice, physical activity, supplements and medications that we can use to enhance your biophysical well-being, and that includes your brain, body. I think it also includes your soul, right, as a Muslim, based on your individual needs and wants. So the reason I pivoted to this in the self-improvement space is I kept finding myself talking about it on social media, and I'm like, I love this. Like every time I go work out, here's something to know about what the research says about this technique versus this technique, right? I just recently, we were talking about seasonal depression because the weather is changing. It's very real. I was talking about the importance of getting your vitamin D in. I study medicine. Like you're an expert on human physiology. I had a friend who, she was just talking to me about some things that she was struggling with in terms of her mental health, and she's on a antidepressant medication, weight gain, things like that. And I remember just being like, can I build you like a plan? Can I build something for you that you can use? It'll be simple, and just if you were to try this for 3 months, I think it'll really help you. And I built it, and then I just named it Biohacking Board, and that's what I realized it was. So it's diet modifications, physical activity, supplements that will interact with our medications, which is why it's helpful to have someone who knows medicine. So that's what biohacking is.
So look, one really interesting thing that I'm not an expert in biohacking, but one thing of practicing a few things I realize is, look, generally people, they say, okay, you know what, wake up in the morning, brush your teeth, eat breakfast, a few hours later have a snack, a few hours. That's what people generally thought was healthy. Biohackers or people who were involved in biohacking said, you know what, skip breakfast. It's going to make you mentally sharp. For instance, don't have sugar in your coffee. Just drink it black, get used to it. Don't put cream in it, for whatever reason. And then there was this, I forgot the name, Victor Pride, I think his name was. He came out with a book called 30 Days for Change or something like that. And he said something really interesting. This is what started I got really interested in this. He's like, every morning, like clockwork.
30 days of discipline?
30 days of discipline. He said, wake up in the morning at 5 o'clock every day. You have no excuse. You have to do it. When you take a shower, take a cold shower. Because if you can take a cold shower, you'll be resilient to anything throughout the day. Every day, wear the best clothes that you have when you're going to work, for instance, or if you leave the house. You can't use any. Once you use an excuse, you have to start over from the beginning. Because you find that about yourself. Even when you're like, you probably found this when you're intermittent fasting. You're like, I got to fast 20 hours today, but it's 18 hours. I'm just going to. And you realize, and you know full well that's going to make you weaker, but you still do it.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you're like, oh, great, I got to start over again, right? And you're like, all right, I'm going to do 24 hours. Like, oh, it's 22 hours. Yeah, it's good enough. No, it's not. You know it's not good enough. You're just weak. That's all it is, right?
Yeah.
Internally. So he says the cold showers and all that is building a certain type of resilience. And,
But as just to build on top of that, so during my traumatic life event, for those who don't know, I talked about it endlessly. Went through a divorce not too long ago, and I only talk about it for your benefit, for you, the listeners. It's not easy to talk about at all, but it was probably the worst moment in my life. And one of those things is I built in some of those principles of cold showers, working out every day, but also like an Islamic
yes, sir.
Best day of my life, where when the Prophet ﷺ had the Sahaba sit down with him after Fajr, and he asked what deeds that the Sahaba did, and I think it was like Abu Bakr who had donated, done everything even before Fajr. So going through the Sunnah and seeing the lives of the Sahaba and the Prophet and how they had the most optimum day, right, where they gave charity, they woke up for Fajr, they did the Hajj.
Fast.
And maybe you didn't hit all those things, right? But this was my goal markers, like throughout the day, before school, before starting my work, read at least 15 minutes of Quran. Okay, if I can't read 15, even 5 minutes, whatever you can, and setting these little milestones throughout the day. We already have the milestones of prayer. Okay, maybe that's what you need, just a prayer as your milestones. Everyone's at different levels, right? But let's say you've already established your prayer, but then you push yourself to have bigger milestones. You add these uncomfortable things like cold showers and working out, and ultimately what happened is at the end of the day, you're so exhausted, physically exhausted, you didn't have time, or you didn't have the energy because of the productivity that you accomplished throughout the day to be consumed by the trauma. I had zero difficulty going to sleep, and even if I did wake up in the middle of the night, I could go back to sleep, or I could do tahajjud if I wanted to. There were many opportunities like that, that just open up. Because your overall physical well-being, your mental well-being is just opening up new pathways of.
Plus, you were building up little milestones to achieve these little victories, even though it's actually considered more, right? But you're doing these little things, and when you attain those, there's a victory and there's a reward within you, and you feel a sense of accomplishment, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And then that feeling gets addictive. So the proactivity and the feeling of doing more becomes like an addictive feeling. I want to accomplish. Obviously, there's a balance, and we learn from our mistakes of burning ourselves out, right? Sometimes that happens. But the other thing that I realized is, were you finished, bro? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the other thing that I realized is that something so simple as like not being too sluggish, just go to sleep earlier. Like ever since childhood, children have this all the time. They feel like they're missing out. They hate going to sleep. They hate bedtime, right? Unless they're really tired that day, right? But we actually have that all, especially on the weekends. Oh, I got to stay up. I got to make the most of my day, right? Yeah. You're not really going to do anything.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You're not really going to do anything. So I think that was very, very important. But the breathing technique, we were talking about Wim Hof breathing, that thing was a game changer, man. Yeah. Like anybody who hasn't researched that, like I know a friend personally, I know a close family member, 2 close family members who are having anxiety and panic attack-esque type stuff. Dude, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm nothing near it. But the breathing technique, I saw how easy it worked with me. It's almost like a pseudo hyperventilation type thing. You take like 30 really strong deep breaths inside, in and out, as high as you can. And then the last breath you blow out as much as you can. Actually, swimmers were using this to hold their breath under. Yeah. And people were just.
If someone wants to learn how to do it, you just Google
Yeah,
it
I'm
or
not going to
YouTube
demonstrate it right now.
Yeah,
Only do
YouTube
it
it because
only do it in an area that is safe where you're sitting down. Never do it
Yeah.
while you are driving
Yes.
or somewhere if you were, because you can pass out from it. And
Yes.
there was actually someone who he's a podcaster who passed out while doing it and got into a car accident.
Oh,
Oh,
snap.
driving.
I thought you were going to say on the episode, I was going to tell Sim to do it. No, that's unfortunate. But
Yeah.
so then on the last breath, you blow all your breath out and you hold it there as long as you can.
yeah.
And then once that finishes, once it's out, you know, one thing I realize is, aside from the tingly fingers and the eyes getting a little light and the, you know, there's a weird, I don't know if it's just me or if it's just a figment of my imagination. In that portion, when I first did it, because, you know, like when you're like, even if you know how to swim, you feel like you're about to drown. You have this crazy panic feeling when you're a little kid.
Yeah.
And then you like almost forget how to swim temporarily, and then something kicks and you start swimming again.
Yeah.
That feeling when I first started doing this happened to me. I was like, dude, I got to get through this because this is. But then I realized is that it helps you embrace that feeling. And
Yeah.
then when your breath is all the way out, you can't hold it anymore. Then you take it all the way in at the top and you hold it there and do like 3 sets of that, right?
Yeah.
I did that with so many people, right, including family members, including friends, that I started realizing this is actually helping a lot of people. I actually know somebody. Again, I'm not saying that this is medical advice. I know somebody who used to take medicine for anxiety, and when they used to travel, they used to get anxiety all the time. For some reason, they used to have to turn back around and go home.
Yeah.
And they started doing this. I'm starting to feel better and better and better and better, right? So there's obviously a huge type of biohacking within breathing, right? But so that part of biohacking, I don't know much about. I wish I researched more about it. But what is it about breathing in and out as hard as you can, in and out, and then holding it on both? When you blow all the air out, hold it there as long as you can, and then take a deep breath in and hold it there as long as you can. What is happening to the mind, body, and soul when that?
I think scientists are still figuring that out.
They are, right?
But unless.
But go ahead, no, please.
Yeah.
We have one right in front of us.
So breath work is okay. So that's a nervous system regulation technique, and if anyone's a nerd and wants to kind of know the science behind it, it's actually because so when you hyperventilate, you put yourself into a state called respiratory acidosis. Basically, you're building up the carbon dioxide in your lungs. That right there is very dysregulating to your nervous system. It sends you into a panic because your body's like, hey, you can't breathe. We need you to breathe. We need oxygen. Your brain needs is one of the most oxygen-rich organs in your entire body. When you do that long breath out, that like final one, you are pushing out all of that carbon dioxide. So that's the science behind it. It's basically that carbon dioxide release. And if there are several different types of breathing techniques you can do to help release the carbon dioxide and help re-regulate your nervous system, and it's a very quick way to stimulate the vagus nerve and calm you down. Lots of different ways, but that's one that got really famous. It is a very effective way to do that. There's another technique which is very simple and actually was made famous by Dr. Andrew Huberman. I'm not sure if
Oh yeah, we
yeah.
love him.
So I love him too. He's great. It's insane how quickly he has been able to completely just change the neurobiology.
He's articulate. He's simplified it, and he's articulate,
Extremely.
and he brings in. I mean, he attracts intelligent people to his show. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so he researched this technique, and it's very simple. Basically, what you do is you take 2 inhales through your nose, and then an exhale out of your mouth. So what you do is you'll take a deep inhale through your nose, and then one more to just catch a little more air in, and then blow out. So you go, and then you extend your exhale. That's the key with all of these techniques. You're going to find one thing in common. The exhale is extended because the longer you can extend it, the more carbon dioxide.
And how many sets of these do you do, or how many reps of these do you do?
People feel better for that one within 2, literally.
That's pretty
try
cool.
it. Just
So the other thing I hear about is people say that like that the tempo of breathing, like you inhale for 5 seconds, hold it up for 5 seconds, and then blow out for 5 seconds, hold on the bottom for 5 seconds, and you do that a few times.
So that's box breathing.
Box breathing, okay.
Yeah, that's box breathing. And then there's another simple one where it's like you want to breathe in, deep breath for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, and then slow exhale for 8 seconds. Just extend your exhale
To regulate the heart or something,
exactly.
right?
And your heart rate will go down. The amount of heat if you're sweating, the amount of sweat production will go down. If your eyes were dilated, your pupils will start to constrict. we can measure these physiological changes.
So this part of biohacking, can we call this breathing technique biohacking? Is this type of biohacking, right? So people usually, when I first heard about this, it was about anxiety, how to mitigate anxiety. Before you're about to give a big seminar or talk in front of hundreds of people, do this. I know that there were some stand-up comedians that said they practice breathing techniques before they go on stage, you know. But is that all that it's good for, is just anxiety or mitigating, even though it's a big thing, mitigating panic attacks? Because for some people it's debilitating.
Modulating stress is what I would say it does best, modulating stress. And biohacking as an idea, right? It's not, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but biohacking specifically, there are so many different elements of it. All those things that I mentioned: behavioral changes, diet, exercise, supplementation, medication use, blah, blah, blah. And when I say medication use, I don't mean you have high blood pressure, so we put you on blood pressure. I mean, we're using medication sometimes off-label to achieve certain results. So with that being said, I forgot what I was trying to say, Wallah.
As far as the benefits that the modulating, you said modulating stress.
We personalize it to the person. The best biohacking is personalized to you and what your goals are. So if someone was saying, and there's like, I really struggle with modulating my stress, I feel stressed all the time, or high functioning executives, right? CEOs and blah, blah, blah. This is what made it so famous. We always are caring about what CEOs are doing, right, to get to the level that they got. And so that might be a biohacking technique they're taught, right? But someone might be like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't feel stressed. I manage stress very well. It's not bothering me. I sleep well. Really what I'm dealing with is my weight, right?
I see.
Or fatigue. I feel very fatigued. Now we can biohack that. Yeah.
Maybe sleep apnea.
But this is why it's so helpful to have someone who's a medical professional, because that's one thing I noted about a lot of biohackers, right? They themselves haven't studied medicine. They might have teams of people who did, but it's something like when someone comes, I'm so tired, what do I do? It's like, okay, my first thing is, let's think of all the medical possibilities we need. Are you iron deficient? Do you have sleep apnea? Do you have hypothyroidism? Like, let's get these checked out. Then you come back to me and it's like, oh, okay, let's talk about your activity, your sleep patterns, your sleep hygiene.
Full blood panel, that's what you're referring to, right? I think, is that what they refer to as full blood panel or something?
There's standard blood tests we do, but it would just be based on what you're like. For example, the iron panel is not a part of the full blood panel. Usually we'll do it if it's indicated. Okay.
Go
see your doctors, you guys. Too many of you guys be sitting around. You get your yearly physical is free. It gives you information. If everything is normal, at least you have a standard, so you know what your normal is in case it goes out of range.
So as far as modulating stress, then we know that stress causes a whole wealth of issues, because you mentioned because of cortisol. And now, because we're talking about breathing as of right now, this is the last question around breathing. I don't know, I mean, you've heard of David Goggins. I don't know if you heard of David Goggins. He talked about a routine of, in the morning, obviously doing a certain type of breathing, but at night, doing lots of stretches. Not yoga per se, but like therapeutic type stretches.
Mobility work.
Yes. But then he was talking about like yoga, like, I don't claim to know yoga. I do a few stretches, which is like the downward dog, especially after do a lot of walking or some type of jogging. It just helps the whole like posterior chain of mine just stretch out really well. I don't feel any tingly feeling in my feet. But there's an interesting thing that I noticed is that it helps you go to sleep really well. Like when you stretch before you go to sleep, if you just spend like 15 to 20 minutes, and it's very relaxing. So what is with that? Why is it that stretching brings you into this really calm sense of well-being?
Yeah. So I want to mention real quick about, you were mentioning his routine. In the morning, he does a specific type of breathing. Then at nighttime, he does stretching.
Before he goes to sleep.
Like if he was to do Wim Hof breathing at nighttime, it actually might not be helpful, because you have to spike your adrenaline first to bring things down, right? As for the yoga and stretching routines, part of it is that is just a potent nervous system regulator. It is a great down regulator, right there, because when you're stretching, you're not just stretching, you're focusing on the number, you're counting, right? 1, 2, I'm going to do this for 10 seconds. Especially if the stretching is painful, you have to slow your breathing to get through the stretch, right? Otherwise, you're not going to do it. Typically, that's how we're taught stretching. If you're doing stretching just to stretch, it might not actually downregulate. It might not do anything mentally for you. But yoga, as an example for stretching, there's so much focus on the body breath connection, right? So you go, right, they'll say like, okay, cat cow pose, for example. You deep inhale here, exhale now, da da da, move with your breath. That's
Okay.
why it just,
But what is that feeling that when you stretch, like it feels almost like too physiological? I know you said that it's a down regulator. The stretching is a down regulator of your nervous system, but what is that feeling like, especially because the legs are such a big muscle and you stretch your legs, and then as soon as you sit up from it, like imagine like you do like some stretches of your legs and then you just sit in like the jalsa position that you would sit in prayer, just to, just shake everything out. But what is that in like immediate
relief.
sense of relief that you feel, like you literally feel it in your brain, like something's happening and you just feel like everything's just gone? What is that feeling?
Yeah, I don't know if I know any research studies about it specifically, other than that there's benefit to it. But if I had to guess, just knowing what I know about physiology, your muscles are tight. When your muscles are tight, it's a stimulus, right? And your brain is constantly noting it. Stretching is basically you're stretching the myofascia. That's what you're doing. By doing that, the muscle fibers are literally stretching, and then you're altering blood flow. When you do that, the ache and the tension is gone. When the tension is gone, you feel relief. Just like if you got a massage, you would feel relief, right?
Yeah.
Even if you were talking to someone in the middle of the massage, it would still be relieving because the tension is no longer there, and you're now able to sit with more comfort. I would assume that's basically like it probably doesn't go further into that, because it's not like it. Yeah, maybe part of it also is that there's a bit of dopamine release when it's happening, or not, maybe serotonin and dopamine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Because it feels good.
That's super interesting. Yeah. So, go ahead.
No.
But mine was kind of, maybe I should talk about it at the end. It was about the journaling thing. I mean, I'm not one to ask for freebies, like I don't want, but do you think you can, just for this episode, I don't want your whole entire program, what you do, but do you think you could give us a little bit of, so myself, probably himself, and just the listeners, from this episode, we can actually like learn something about something very proactive. So I don't know how long it takes to explain the journaling technique you were talking about, but is that something that you're willing to share with us, just as one element of what your coaching is?
We can, yeah.
Cool. So are you cool if we do that right now, or do you have something
absolutely.
else related to it?
Yeah.
No,
I'm really interested in this.
Are you okay with time?
I'm good.
Yeah,
I leave whenever. But I had a question for you,
Yeah.
Sim. I'm curious. It's been like itching my brain. You mentioned about the traumatic experience you had, and then I noticed you kind of your body movement. This is what happens when you're a trauma coach, and you don't have to speak about anything.
No.
If
I'm
you're not
very
comfortable.
open. That's why one of the realizations I had, or kind of a moment of clarity going through all that, is that I am supposed to go through this to help other people as well. Like, it's not just about improving myself, but hopefully, inshallah, to share some of these experiences with people so that
That's
they can
the
benefit.
portion of the trial,
And I don't care what other people think.
Yeah.
Most people are
Honestly,
extremely boring, and I don't care about them thinking, oh, look at he's a basket case or whatever. Whatever.
Okay. That's why I share about therapy too. Like I imagine, I don't think people are going to be like, well, the PA who practices medicine went to therapy. How sad. It's like, no. If I did it, I think a lot of people might feel more comfortable being willing.
Yeah, those who are close to me, Sister Hana, they know like how incredibly busy I am, and a lot, like so much stress from so many different areas of my life. It's not necessarily like crippling stress. It's just everything is kind of cumulative, Everything brings along its added stressors. So I feel like when I'm stressed, I feel like a lot of like my shoulders and stuff, like, or anxiety. Before we had this podcast, I was a super shy introvert. Just coming on, our show was an audio only show for a couple of years, because I was just too freaked out by cameras. Like me being on camera, like, who am I, And when we were starting this video thing, I'd have to do these breathing exercises to get the anxiety out and stuff like that. So I'm familiar with everything you're talking about. Like, I've lived it. But yeah, so when you were talking about that stuff, or when I was talking about it, I think I kind of like, I do these adjustments, or because I'm always dealing with this tension that I'm always carrying in my shoulders, especially when there's like a lot going on. But it's not as bad right now, but typically when I'm a good workout will sort itself out, like doing good shoulder and neck exercises. Those will kind of make you able to feel really comfortable. It kind of loosens up the muscles,
Yeah.
brings a lot of circulation there. So yeah, that's what you noticed.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that is we didn't get to talk about this when it comes to trauma, but there's a famous book some people might be familiar with called The Body Keeps a Score. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about it, but
I've heard about
it's
it.
written by a Harvard trained psychiatrist named Dr. Vanderkolk. I'm not co-signing him. The start of his book talks about a war criminal, basically. So but he was someone who shed a lot of light on the concept of trauma and complex PTSD. The body keeps a score is the idea that when we endure trauma, this is why I said your body's going to tell you. You don't need to figure it out for someone. You're going to realize this is not normal, and your body's going to push you to try to do something about it. A trauma lives in our bodies, and it is to the extent that if I have someone in kind of and this is something I do with my clients as well, is just so they can get a sense of how their trauma presents physically, I'll say, okay, let's cut off all stimulation, right? Let's go to a place that's not loud and no one's around you, blah, blah, blah. I want you to sit down and I want you to think about whatever happened to you. And when you think about it, don't think about the entire event, think about a part of it. A little bit of it is enough to stimulate your nervous system's panic, right? And then I'll say, tell me where you feel it in your body. Everyone has a different answer, right? I feel it in my hands. I feel it in my chest. I feel my throat. It's called and there's a very powerful, if you're someone who can find a therapist who does this, a trauma processing technique called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. EMDR basically takes what we do when we're sleeping, which is REM sleep, where our eyes are moving. That's what rapid eye movement sleep is. That's when our brain is processing short-term to long-term. When you are traumatized, your brain doesn't let you do that in sleep. So they learned how to do it when you're awake, okay? During EMDR, as the EMDR practitioner is doing it with you, and I'm not trained in this, but I have had it done, they will literally tell you, okay, where are you feeling it right now? And I remember we'd be processing it, and I process it a little bit. I'm like, okay, it's in my throat right now. Now I'm feeling it in my hands. My feet are going numb. And my trauma response, this is how I know now when I'm too overstimulated, this part of my arm, the upper part of my arms, will literally start to tingle and get warm. And this is how I know when I'm being and it doesn't happen as much anymore. It used to happen every single day, right? So
is that what like tapping is too? Like, have you heard of?
Yeah,
it's because when I heard about tapping, I started laughing.
I know.
I'm like, this is woo-woo therapy, and then I'm like, you know what? Let me give it a shot. And I'm like, maybe there is something to it. And I did some research, just surface level research, and found that there is some scientific literature on it, and that
what is tapping?
It's like go ahead, explain it.
It's so there's a technique called the emotional. Your audience gets a lot of freebies today, subhanAllah. But these are just powerful techniques, and anyone can do it. Emotional freedom technique. It's what it's called, and it's literally a process of affirmative identity statements combined with tapping in very specific areas, and you do that over and over again. It sounds like woo science. I can't even explain it to you. I can't explain it to you scientifically. I don't know, because it came from the idea of Chinese medicine meridians and all of that. So but they've done research on it, and they've used it for anxiety management, depression, and like significant actual change. So where we would call this a valid study, right? No, there's enough of a change between this and placebo to know that this works. We don't necessarily need to know how it works. I teach that technique to my clients, actually, and it works.
You call it EFMD?
It's called, no, this is emotional freedom technique. It's
emotional freedom technique,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can YouTube this, and they'll show you how to do it. And it feels weird when you're doing it initially, but I don't know what it is about it. This is one thing I can't explain to you guys, but it works. It definitely works.
Yeah. It was humbling because like when I was first told about it, I laughed, and I'm like, this is the stupidest thing in the world. How could anyone benefit? Because you're just literally like kind of tapping at your different parts of your face and stuff, and you're talking about whatever's bothering you and whatever's stressing you out, or if there's something that's causing anxiety, you're talking about it. I think it works, to be honest. Yeah,
it does. I literally just did it, by the way. Yeah. Like I did the first one, which is it goes between your eyes.
Yeah.
I immediately just felt a drop in my my physiological tension, and that's not placebo. Like I'm very attuned after doing this for years. I'm very attuned to my body. So try it, you guys.
Yeah.
It's worth it. But yeah, so trauma lives in the body. and you can identify where it is. And you were talking about it, and I immediately noticed that you reacted to it, meaning it's still traumatizing to you.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. It's a constant. I don't think there's a healing point where you say, "Oh, I'm over the trauma." I think
Who says that? Why do you believe that?
Because we're human beings where we can't completely forget stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always going to be, even when you're listening to a song, there's a trigger point, a lyric or something that's mentioned that makes you relive that,
Mm-hmm.
So there's certain songs that were my favorite songs that I can't listen to anymore. And so but it's a daily journey, and you have to build that discipline in you. I was an incredibly undisciplined individual who followed whatever whenever I felt the principle was like, oh, if I feel like doing it, I'll do it. And I found that was the worst way to live your life. You have to do things, you have to implement things into your life, good habits, whether you feel like it or not, you do it. And when you operate out of this mindset of, if I don't feel like doing it today, or if today's not, that's a recipe for failure.
Embracing discomfort, embracing boredom.
You have to push yourself. And this is like everything, you realize like these things are connected to your religion too. Like all of this stuff, these habits, the way you conduct your life. Like you can't say, I don't feel like praying today. I don't feel like waking for Fajr. You're setting up disaster for yourself. You can't.
Action has to precede motivation.
That whole mindset of, I'm not up for it today. You have to fight that. That's like a disease of Western society, where many people in the East, they don't have that luxury. They have to get up. Even when they're sick, they have to go to work. It's life and death for them. And this is how human beings have lived for tens of thousands of years, how they survived. There was no time for recovery. You had to get going. You had to figure it out real quick, or else life will steamroll you by, and children, relationships, everything will get destroyed all around you because you just spent time waiting for that moment where you end up feeling like doing something about it.
You can either do it now or wait till you're forced to. And trauma is a great catalyst for personal development. I guess that's the one baraka about it. But I do want to challenge something that you just said, which is that you can't fully heal or get over a trauma. And I think a misconception some people have is that healing means you forget and it never evokes emotion anymore. Yeah. But really what healing trauma is that you take it from short-term memory to long-term memory, where you can now say, this thing happened, but it happened to me in the past, and it no longer represents who I am. And you know what? It sucks, and it's sad, and maybe every now and then there's another piece of the trauma that kind of comes up that makes you emotional in whichever way, but it no longer is affecting your current functioning because you're no longer in fight or flight. So I really think...
Well, no, wonderfully explained. What I meant was, the memory is still there.
You learned how to cope with it.
Yeah. It's meaning not that the definition, how she described as the trauma in its sense, how it affects you physically. Yes, of course, can be healed, and but there are those trigger points and those memories. They're always going to be there, and there's always going to be some kind of wisdom that you can extract from it to live a better life.
Yeah, that's where the rahma portion comes from, right? I think one other thing is that I was actually kind of curious about when somebody wants to incorporate something very, very specific as far as biohacking is concerned. I know we're kind of just like talking about everything together now, which is fine. It's pretty cool.
They can vary, like they can intertwine a lot, because biohacking is a great tool in trauma healing, and then you can biohack without any trauma because it's just you're enhancing your biophysical self.
Got it. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that people do to avoid certain sicknesses, right? Whether it be jogging every day, whether it be walking every day, whether it be obviously eating a lot more healthy, obviously is preventative measures, right? But what's something other than the breathing that we talked about, other than stretching, something other than the tapping, right, for instance, what else is something that everyone could do that's very, very easy, and it actually is preventative for a lot of other things? I know it's a very general thing.
That is a general, because there's so many things.
Your choice of how you would coach people.
You could. So you can always get into the complex biohacking techniques, right? It's like the intermittent fasting, the cold exposure, the sauna, the certain supplement regimens, and blah blah blah. I think if I had to tell everyone to start doing something, it would be start taking magnesium glycinate at nighttime. So magnesium is an electrolyte that is an essential part of our bodily functions. It is important for our nervous system, so our nerve conduction, but also for the way our muscles contract. And 70-something% of Americans are deficient in it. Now, when you're deficient in magnesium, one sign that we typically see is like muscle twitching. So if you're someone who has their eyelid twitching a lot, you might be magnesium deficient. But also low magnesium is correlated with symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of headaches and migraines, sleep issues. It affects a host of other aspects of your health. Just taking that, and specific magnesium glycinate has been shown to improve sleep. That's why we choose that one, because it also is absorbed very well, and it's very safe. It's not a sleep aid. It is something our body needs. And so if you're going to take it at nighttime. This is how I got rid of my migraines. If I had gone to someone like me as a PA, I would have been put on drugs. I would have been put on whether a beta blocker or sumatriptan, whatever. And I was having migraines 3 to 4 times a week. It was, yeah.
Is that why they have like that? I don't know if you've ever seen a supplement. It's called like Calm, and it's the main thing is just magnesium in it, like different types of magnesium.
Magnesium is has an anxiolytic effect. It actually decreases anxiety. And when I got my magnesium level, it took about 2 months for them to actually go up. And I knew my magnesium was low because when I had the ER visit I talked about in the beginning, they drew my magnesium, and so it was low. And I was like, well, that's weird, because I don't eat horribly. And so, my migraines went away. Alhamdulillah.
Okay. And I think this comes to the point where I really want to know about this journaling technique. So can we just talk about the journaling technique?
And I had one more biohacking technique. Yeah. Everyone, if your breakfast should be protein heavy. Every breakfast you have should be protein heavy. Drop the pancakes and the French toast and blah, blah, blah.
Darn it.
I know. If you care about your overall well-being and is a protein heavy breakfast. It can be eggs, it can be oatmeal, and you can add things that add protein powder to it, add nuts and peanut butter and whatever. Lots of options, right, that are there. And the reason being is because when you eat something carb heavy, especially in the morning, what happens is your blood sugar spikes. And when it spikes, after it spikes, there is a drop. And when your your sugar is our body's energy source, and now it spiked and then it dropped, and so you lose energy and you have a lot of fatigue. Not only that, but doing that, iterating that over and over and over again leads to something called insulin resistance. This is why Americans are so healthy, because the American standard diet is extremely carb heavy. And the reason
aren't healthy, you said, right?
Carb.
No, you said Americans aren't healthy.
Aren't healthy, yeah. Aren't healthy is because our meals are our American standard diet is so carb heavy, and we used to focus on fats as the bad thing, but that was actually because the carb companies, the sugar companies, were funding those studies. So now we know that because these constant spikes in blood sugar and drops in spikes are leading to insulin resistance, meaning your body releases insulin anytime there's a blood sugar spike. And then you're having multiple of these, and eventually your body stops responding to insulin. Insulin is supposed to take that sugar that's in your blood and pull it into your cells. And when that happens, that's when diabetes develops. You cannot have diabetes without insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is step one, right? Diseases like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, if there are women who are watching this and you're struggling with weight loss, you're struggling with getting pregnant, get evaluated for PCOS. Not everybody presents the same, and that is insulin resistant, heart attack risk. You can also get your insulin levels drawn and see with a number if you are insulin resistant or not. Starting off with protein, you don't get that blood sugar spike. Not only that, but protein, your body has to work harder to turn it into sugar. So that's good, because you want that time for the reaction. You're going to feel more energized. It helps cut down on a lot of fatigue. And your protein that you take, your body is what uses that as the building mechanisms for a lot of reactions in our body, but also your muscle. And when you have increased protein plus resistance training, i.e. intentionally lifting something to break down muscles to allow more muscle to grow, you now build more muscle, and then that muscle is constantly burning calories, right? And so now you are actually like you're increasing your metabolism in a way that's healthier for you.
Multifold effect.
So there you go.
So if somebody had to choose between two things, eating a protein breakfast or not eating until lunch, for instance, what would you say?
You can do it your first meal of the day, basically. If you're intermittent fasting, let your first meal of the day be a protein-heavy meal.
Okay, that's awesome. Cool. That way you combine two in one. Yeah, that's awesome.
Intermittent fasting is awesome. It's a great way. If you're pre-diabetic, try and you're scared to go on medication, which I think you should go on medication regardless, just to get you out of the state. Try intermittent fasting.
And intermittent fasting, in your reference, are you referring to basically 16 hours fast, 8-hour eating window, or like 18-hour fast?
Yeah,
okay.
there are different ways you can do it. There's a 16-8, there's the 14-10, there's people who do it even shorter eating windows. There's a fun fact, creeping Sharia, 2 days of fasting a week is now making it into the research.
Is it really?
The fasting the way we do it.
Dry fasting, yeah.
And
I saw that and I literally rolled my eyes.
I saw that too. I was like, wait a second. Everything that we're saying, it sucks. Like, I hate it
because
that
we don't have people breaking into those fields and not just for Muslims.
Yeah.
For like, imagine that Muslim Andrew Huberman.
Right.
You know how many influencers of that type, are like hardcore Christians and they never say it.
Yeah.
You find it out secretly, and then you're like, dang, these people are really doing something for the community.
Exactly. I always feel guilty. I'm like, oh man, now, like, there's like a health benefit now that you found a health benefit to do 2-day fasting every week. Now are you going to do it? Otherwise, if there wasn't, if you never found out about it, so there's that also kind of guilt associated. Like, oh man,
I do intermittent fasting usually in terms of delaying my breakfast time and when I stop eating. I used to do it unintentionally, and my sisters would always be like, why does this little punk never gain weight? I'm like, do you see how much I eat? But I plan on introducing the 2 days a week fasting when I'm in my 30s, inshallah, because your metabolism just goes whoop, and that's a really good way to reset your metabolism.
Interesting.
Awesome. So we're coming up on 2.5 hours, Sister Hana. What's yours? What's your closing thoughts? I know he wanted you to answer.
We'll talk about journalism and stuff later. It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
anything that you want to talk about that we missed?
Yeah. We talked about, maybe one day, I don't know if you guys would be willing to have me back. We can talk about the marriage recession thing at another time. That's a whole other topic. But
the recession?
Marriage recession.
Oh, marriage recession. Okay, got it.
Well, why don't wait? Do you have time? Can you?
I'm like I said, I don't have anything.
Why don't you tell us a bit about the marriage recession that you're? How did you get into this
idea?
Like, are you helping people match up or what? So
funny enough, when I first started my coaching company, I wanted to do premarital coaching. I just thought that was a cool space to work in. I was interested in it. I did a lot of research on, what does the data say about the way humans, how we pair, how do we decide who we're going, and then the complexities of being Muslim. It's interesting. And I would do workshops, and it was really fun. I stopped doing it just because I was like, the trauma thing takes precedent. Like, your trauma is going to screw up your marriage, so let's put that on pause. The marriage recession is the idea that young Muslims, especially, so I'm going to speak just about people who are never been married, are finding it to be so difficult to find a life partner. And I would just reflect on it. And it wasn't me who said this. It was a brother who said this. And I was like, what's going, kind of, he was asking me if I knew anyone. And I was like, I'm not sure, maybe you can ask these people in your, he's like, Hana, there's a marriage recession. I was like, that's a really good way to put it. And it just got me thinking, what could be contributing to that? Like, marriage is the most, it is an extremely emphasized sunnah, right? And it is, I think, the only sunnah that you are mandated to celebrate, right? Like, you're not mandated to have an aqiqah if you have a child. That's just a sunnah. But you are mandated to announce to the community and celebrate your marriage. So yeah, that was basically it. I was just like, what's contributing to it? And I had a bunch of thoughts on this, and it was like, okay, so first things first, right? A lot of us are operating in a way where we don't realize that our parents, a lot of our parents, the way they got married, or grandparents, is there oftentimes it was arranged, right? So they didn't need to think too hard. But not only that, they were existing in a society before the internet, meaning their cultural norms aligned up, were much more likely to be aligned. Their understanding of gender roles was much more likely to be aligned. The gender roles were much more structured as well, and compatibility was much more likely because of that, right? And then obviously the pressures of, like, you don't want to get divorced, and you see through things, and that has its issues too, with abuse and all that good stuff. But now we're in a place where we don't have as easy of a matchup, and our norms are so different, and you can access information from anywhere at any time. That's not a bad thing, that's good, but it changes people's ways of thinking. So compatibility is much more difficult to find sometimes. We're delaying marriage. Most young people are getting married in their early 30s, right? Some of it is a financial issue, but then the big thing that I think about is the way hookup culture has infiltrated Islam, and the way Western feminism has affected the marriage structure and the family structure. And that's a whole other thing I'm sure we can talk about another time.
But yeah, I mean, and when you think about just the advent of social media, like Instagram and stuff, and at least from a male perspective, you see so many different type of girls, and you're like, okay, well, this is the kind of girl I want to marry. And the human mind, or at least the male mind, is not conditioned to have seen so many different women and try to find, oh, this is the one that I deeply resonate with, and this is the type of wife I want to live my life with. You typically saw a few women in Muslim societies, at least, or even in the non-Muslim societies over hundreds of years. You didn't see that many women. Women weren't out and about, right? And this is, I think, one of the problems that feminism brought, was that women now are like everywhere, and they have this ability to, display everything about themselves on social media. So the way
you said that, I mean, the women are now everywhere.
Well,
in the sense of there's a complete disregard of modesty and, like.
But not only that, it's used to sell commodities. It's used in business. I mean, like from like the 60s and 70s, right?
Right. When I was at a Muslim country, you hardly saw any women, and just that you didn't realize, like, how much women being so in your face in the society affects you on a subconscious level. You're like, oh wow.
In terms of, like, sexualization.
Or just having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis.
And also desensitizations too, on many degrees.
Right. Yeah. So I think, at least from guys, there's the sexualization of women has really affected them negatively, where they've have this one specific idea of what they want in their wife, and how she should look like. And then there's the other added element of modern capitalism, capitalist society, where you feel like you need to be at a certain age before you get married, and then before that age you can have your fun, and a lot of guys are messing up their lives that way too.
The illusion of choice, right? Now it's like, I can always find something, until you can't, then you're like, oh no, what's going on? And then the rush to get married, and the settling down, and the, like, people willing to shoot themselves in the foot, knowing they're getting into a marriage that is not good for them, but being like, I need to check this box, and then regretting it later. It's a hot mess. And subhanAllah, you're speaking about the sexualization of women as damaging to men, and the damage to women is insanity, and the way that it infiltrates our community is beyond belief. Because, I mean, first and foremost, it's something I'm sure I'll get a lot of flack for saying this, but there's a sexualization of hijab. Yeah. A lot of the way, and I'm known for being very blunt about things, so I'm going to be very blunt about this. Hijab is a physical and moral conduct code with particular requirements. And it doesn't matter how you feel about it. It doesn't matter how your heart feels about it. It's a checklist. Is your hair covered or you're being showing? Are your sleeves long or are your forearms showing? All of that. And this is not to say that I do it perfectly 100% of the time, but I will never deny if someone was to come up to me and be like, you're doing this wrong. I wouldn't be like, no, it's not wrong. Yeah, it is. And I remember I came across a TikTok the other day that really made me like, oh, subhanallah, where we have been as women. And it was this dentist. She's a Muslim dentist, and there's like the progression of when a woman's about to take her hijab off, right? It starts becoming turban and then being showed, and it gets where then the hoodies are coming on, and eventually that ends up coming off. And this is not to ignore the complexity of it's difficult wearing hijab, and you'll never know unless you're a woman experiencing it, especially me as a medical professional. I'm acutely aware that immediately as soon as people see me, they formulate certain opinions, and that's hard to deal with. But she was on this TikTok crying about, sharing her decision to take her hijab off. And that's between her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of the pain. And I'm glad that it causes her pain, because some people, the pain comes from their fear of what people are going to say, not their fear of Allah. But what threw me off was she said, I thought a lot about this and I prayed istikhara on it, and just know, like, I talked to God about it and blah blah. And I was about to comment, but I'm like, I'm not in the mood to get attacked in the comments. You can't pray istikhara to commit a sin. And the sexualization of hijab has led women to believe that they can use Islamic techniques to justify the abandonment of modesty, and that's what it is. And I have a whole YouTube video to any of my sisters who are listening to this, or if you are a man who has a woman you love and trust, and she's struggling with this, I have a YouTube video for women struggling to wear hijab, because I'm never going to tell a woman to take it off. It doesn't matter if your heart is feeling hurt over it. Let's work through it, right? Let's figure out why. Let's see how you can cope, because it's a fard, and Allah does not make something a fard if it was intended to be left.
No, it is very important, because I've heard
Coming
some
from a
therapists.
woman.
I've heard of some therapists, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, they say, you know what, this is something that's an obstacle in your life right now, and you should not adhere to this dress code because, referring to the hijab, because it's making your trauma or whatever a lot worse. And that's why I think it's very, very important that we're able to get people who are upright Muslims that deal with Muslim problems, right? There's a lot of people who are even non-Muslim, or people who are just like super liberal in their Islam, and they're trying to help people that are Muslim, and they're giving them some weird advice and bad advice.
There are
right?
certain things that are hard stops, and because of these social media whole thing, that's another thing. I remember my sister saying this. She's like, why is it that we see so many girls when they achieve the pinnacle of Western success, right? You get a good job and you're a dentist or a physician or a PA or whatever, and then the hijab comes off. What message is that sending? What message is that sending to young girls who right now are struggling with that? And what message is that sending to society, who tells us that women are oppressed, or like Muslim women are oppressed? Right.
They succeed, and then it comes out.
And the thing about it is, it first started off as an individual choice, right? And a lot of girls, this is my choice between me and Allah. And of course, 100%, like, I cannot speak for you. Allah is the one who is going to decide how he measures this on the scale. But at a certain point, all things that we do as Muslim, there's a point where it becomes a public situation, right? So it's like your salah is your salah between you and Allah, until everyone stops praying and everyone stops coming to the salah, to the masjid. Now it's a community problem. Your hijab coming off was your problem when it first started, but now that we're seeing all these influencers do it, and these hijabi influencers who got their start and made their money off of selling hijabs doing it, now it becomes a community issue. And we need to be willing to stand up and say, hey, we can be empathetic to the struggle, and also uphold the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he told his female Muslim servants, this is what I want you to be doing. And this is coming from someone that no one can say you don't know what it's like to struggle, because my journey with hijab was one that was difficult, but I made a promise it's never coming off. Alhamdulillah. And if any women want help with that, reach out to me, DM me, email me, whatever. If we need to make a support group, if you need a webinar, we'll do it, right? Let's support each other towards that. And if you're someone who's struggling and thinking about taking it off, that YouTube video is there for you.
Awesome.
Well, there's this common theme that at least I'm seeing among Muslims, especially Muslims of influence, where they reinforce these bad decisions, where they're like, instead of giving them, especially sisters with hijab problems, or it could be anything, but there's this kind of almost like a one of the nervous things about inviting you, because I didn't know whether you were these type of people were.
Listen, I get called liberal on social media all the time, and I'm like, you guys are so funny. You have no idea anything.
So because I was nervous, because there's a culture that's being developed in therapy, in the mental health business, where people are just being reinforced with bad decisions. Their bad decisions are like, oh yeah, your parents were toxic in, or
So
your
cut them
family
off.
was toxic in trying to get you to wear hijab, and it was kind of what's the new term they're using, like a religious.
Spiritual abuse.
Spiritual abuse, exactly. This
I
was
have a YouTube
spiritual
video on
abuse
that.
about wearing hijab. Well, what would you tell a sister who's saying that the hijab is spiritual abuse on her, and that's why she's taking it off?
Yeah, so it goes back to what the question you asked me about. How would you navigate the issue of a Muslim who is only identifying as Muslim, distance themselves from Deen? And the thing is separating the emotion out from it, right? There's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and then what your parents said. And sometimes those things conflict, but it's the same topic of conversation. It was about hijab, and you were abused through hijab. But yeah, it's something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for you. Here's the thing, right? Mental well-being and psychological well-being is a very selfish thing. In fact, we're privileged to even be able to discuss it. Like, in the sense of, if you're able to access things that allow for that, there's a certain privilege in that. I recognize that wholly. But because it is selfish, it is a great tool for shaitan to utilize, right? Because we all want to feel better. Nobody wants to be depressed. Nobody wants to be anxious. Nobody wants to be waking up hating their life, wishing they could just sleep a few more hours and not have to deal with the day. And so shaitan is like, hey, Allah wants you to feel better. Allah wants you to feel right. You're not supposed to feel like this. So what can we do to get you there? And if you ever come to the conclusion that a better life for you includes abandoning something Allah made a requirement, even temporarily, I want you to know that shaitan just won a battle with you, and you shouldn't let him win the war. There never, ever, ever is going to be a time where leaving something that is a fard is going to be a solution for anything. It is going to only accrue more and more, because when you open that door, you now open up an entire door of spiritual, it's essentially you opened a window for spiritual attack from shaitan. Christians talk about this all the time, right? The spiritual attack of the devil. And that's the reality of it. When we abandon hijab, we're abandoning modesty to a certain degree. You can still cover your arms and cover your neck and your hair showing, but hijab part is connected to the Islamic idea of modesty, right? In hayat. And modesty, we live in a physical and a metaphysical world. So the physical manifestation might look like hijab, and for men it looks like something different. But modesty is also a metaphysical concept, and it affects the way the angels see and interact with you, right? Muslims need to get this. We live in a physical and metaphysical world. Things might not make sense to you, but it doesn't matter, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who invented these rules, and he's the creator of the metaphysical world, right? And so you just have to be willing to not let yourself cross that line. And if you cross it, you figure out as best as you can how to pull yourself right back. My friend said something to me one time which completely changed, because I used to be the kind of person of let them take off their hijab. They're going through it, and maybe they'll come back and blah blah blah. My friend said something to me that changed it, because it encapsulated the idea of a window to spiritual attack, which is, she was like, Hana, when you think about if you took your hijab off, how likely is it that you're going to start carrying a sajada and an extra hijab and arbaya or something in your purse when it's salah time and you're out? So this led to you leaving salah. And she said it, and then I started seeing it. Friends who I knew I have friends who don't wear hijab, by the way. We have these conversations very respectfully, and I love them to death. But I would see it with them. Hijab came off, salah went next. And then what happened? Now the modest clothing that was being worn, now it's like, okay, we're wearing things that are shorter and shorter. And then we're not really coming to the masjid anymore because it feels weird, because people are judging the way I look. And then you're disconnecting, and look, shaitan pulled you away slowly. You're not smarter than Allah, nobody, for anything, right? I had this conversation with someone about weed, right? It's not a bad thing. It's helping me relax. It's like, but you're not smarter than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to trust that the injunctions he gives us, if he labels it a fard, leaving that is destruction.
Yes.
And as women in the Muslim community, we need to stop being afraid of being called privileged or colorblind or whatever other words are or unnuanced, tone deaf. Sorry, that's what it is.
Yeah, so many new words,
yeah,
yes.
Tone deaf and all of that, right? Because we don't know the experiences. I don't need to know the experiences to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us. And everyone, the rules are there despite the nuance of the experience. We have to encourage one another and build those communities. And I love seeing the women that do that. There are some modest influencers who actually really do uphold hijab in the most beautiful way. And I'm like, I like that. I like seeing that happen. Yeah.
Awesome. Sheikh, any closing thoughts?
No, man, I'm good. Alhamdulillah. I talked a lot. Jazakallah khairan.
Sister Hana, this is one of my favorite episodes of the year.
Oh, alhamdulillah.
Really, really grateful and honored that you came and visited us. I really hope that, you feel like this place has open doors for you. Anytime you have
Barakallah,
anything new that you want to talk about, we're incredibly impressed with you.
Oh, thank you.
You're incredibly talented, and we don't say that to many people.
Oh, I appreciate it.
So I really hope you. I'm excited to see where you take your career. So I think you said you just only started a couple of years ago with this, but really excited to see where you take this, and really feel like you could be one of the best at this.
Thank you.
And really do wish you the best. Thank you so much for coming on.
Can I do a few plugs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, this is my opportunity to plug. So for any women who are dealing with trauma, my trauma group coaching program is open. Application is open. It's open on a rolling basis. Cohorts are launched every 1 to 2 months. The next one, the application is open for 1 more week. It costs less than what therapy would cost. There's a reason for that as the introduction. So it's worth it. You can book a discovery call with me and we can talk about whether the program is a good fit. Anyone who is interested in biohacking and biohacking one-on-one coaching, you can find that information. It's under self-improvement one-on-one coaching on my website. If you'd like to follow me, inshallah, you guys will put the tags in the description. If you are someone who is interested in having me on a podcast or speaking to your community or whatever it might be, my email will also be there, inshallah. And yeah, I have a YouTube channel. The quality is going to get better, inshallah, in terms of the filming, but the content quality I think is pretty good. Feel free to subscribe to that. It means a lot, and it's beautiful seeing this community grow. Honestly, I did not think people were going to be interested in to see it growing as fast as it is. Even though it's small right now, I anticipate it's going to blow up, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah.
God-conscious self-improvement is...
And what was the YouTube channel name?
The YouTube, so it'd be youtube.com/Alasry, HALASRYH. Yeah, if you just look up my name.
It'll be in the episode
inshallah.
description.
And send DMs, you guys interact. I love talking to you guys.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and add that into our episode description right now. Sister Hana, thank you again.
No problem, guys.
For our listeners, please leave a comment in the comment section below, letting us know what your thoughts with the show is. If you have any questions for Sister Hana, throw them in the comment section as well.
Yeah, I'll reply to them, inshallah, once I'm home. Or ideas for future podcast topics if you guys...
Yeah, of course. Leave a comment in the comment section below with the future show ideas as well. For our co-host, Sheikh Amir, and our guest, Sister Hana, my name is Sim. We'll see you all next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you guys so much. This was really fun.
Yeah, no problem.
It is hot in here.
Yeah, we had from the east.